Chapter 71, Asgardian Form. Thor and I alone stood in the middle of the wasteland, waiting for the flares firing off that would signal the test starting. So we passed the time doing something I'd always wanted to try. Ugh. I tugged hard. Nothing. I did it again, but it was as though the thing weighed 1,000,000 pounds. It didn't even budge. I laughed, stepping away from Mjolnir. Yeah, I figured. Thor gave me a cocky look and stepped forward to easily lift the hammer off of the desert floor. Don't feel bad. Even the greatest warriors can't lift it. Though I am curious to see if changing forms will change your worthiness. Probably not. My mind is still the same. Or my soul, or pride, or whatever Mjolnir reads, I thought for a moment. Well, maybe the more robotic forms like Upgrade or Clockwork could do it. Did inanimate objects or robotic creatures count? But Vision and Ultron had never been able to lift the hammer in the comics. Wait, had they? In some comic I hadn't read yet? Damn it, I wish I had the Marvel Wikia on hand. Mahmoud, Thor said hesitantly, getting my attention. I need to tell you that I am not sure how this may go. Asgardians. The meaning of our existence is strange to describe. My father might have some idea of how this will go, but I don't. I blinked. Okay, so you're saying, be ready for anything, Thor said simply. He hesitated. Mahmoud, what do you believe most represents you? When you think of yourself, your actions, who are you, at your core? That threw me even more. Wait, are you saying that you think I'll change based on my personality? As I said, I'm not sure, Thor shook his head. We are, unfortunately, in uncharted waters. Damn it, I hadn't even changed and the Asgardian form had already made me bewildered to all hell. The flares went off then. We shared a look before I lifted up the Omnitrix and hesitantly flipped through the menu. On reaching the Asgardian form, I stopped to think about the possibilities before me. Then I pressed down on the dial. And the change began. In that timeless instant, I felt the changes come. It was by far the weirdest transformation so far. I felt my height rise until I had an inch on Thor, my muscles filling until I was only slightly less bulky than he was. Then my muscles felt as though they began to get filled with lead, becoming heavier and heavier as the dried-out wasteland earth beneath me shifted at the increase in my density. I felt something within me shift. I couldn't explain it. It was like a new organ grew in my chest, one somehow connected to the world around me. My clothes changed in the flash of green light, my normal shirt being replaced by a white metal on my upper chest and a black shirt beneath the armor that felt as though it was made of a smooth and cool liquid. A long red piece of cloth that wrapped around my waist with one end going down along my right leg was matched by the one wrapped around my shoulders, the cloth going down my back. My pants were like some combination of Thor's and something Aladdin would have worn, black scale on top of white cloth, with boots the exact same as Thor's. A pair of black gauntlets rested on each of my forearms, the Omnitrix glowing brightly on my left arm. Asgardian. 3. Wait, really? That was what I could come up with on short notice? Damn, need to come up with a better name than that. I'd brainstorm later. Even Ben had to rename a couple after all. I felt so strange. Like I was me, but more. It was an unnerving feeling, being in my body but better. I looked down at myself, rubbing at the carvings on my new white chest plate. Thor, are these Arabic? Some of it. Thor stepped forward, looking intrigued. But the rest is all different languages. Including my own. He tapped the lower part of the armor, where my ribs ended. There, that's old. I have no idea what that means. But I've seen it once. I frowned, then tried to move around a bit. Arms, legs, neck, everything was working. Except it felt 1,000 times stronger. All the little aches and pains that came with being human were gone, replaced with the incredible strength of this new form. So, what should I do? I asked. Thor rubbed his bearded chin. Then he put Mjolnir down and walked towards me. Well, let's see how strong you are. Then Thor, the god of thunder, punched me in the face. A shockwave followed the impact, and I staggered back with a pained shout. For a moment, I blinked at the feeling coming from my jaw. Something within me roared to the forefront. Anger that felt like some combination of the rage I could feel as wrath and forearms. The sheer power that Wrath's anger could rise to, combined with the code of honor in my DNA when I changed into forearms. Righteous anger, burning in my soul. So I punched Thor in the face, sending another shockwave outward and staggering Thor. Oh shit. I shouted, shocked at my own action as the founding Avenger blinked in surprise. Thor, I am so sorry, my friend, I simply lost control of myself. Are you well? I blinked. Wait, has my method of speech changed? Or, I focused on my speech. Okay, no, that's the placebo effect. Seriously, are you okay, dude? Thor laughed, rubbing his chin. Yes, I'm fine. Well, you are quite strong, Thor winced. Actually, more than I expected. Like I was just hit by Volstagg. I felt a bit of pride at that, being compared to arguably the strongest of the Warriors 3. A tightness in my chest seemed to ease as I thought about that comparison and saw Thor's pride in me. Okay, let's see what else you've got. Thor stepped forward and swung his fist again. I blocked it on my arm, working on some instinct deep within me to follow with a counterpunch. Thor parried. He kicked me in the chest, sending me flying into a thorny bush. The thorn snapped against my tough skin. I rolled through the bush and down a rocky hill before rising to press my booted feet against the light brown earth. Thor was in mid-leap with a punch aimed at my face. I dodged to the side, letting him crater the earth behind me, then grabbed his shoulders and spun around to throw him at a boulder, which shattered. Come on, I shouted, the power getting to my head a bit. Yes, Thor cheered, ignoring the boulder he'd turned to gravel, speeding forward and smashing into my waist, his massive arms squeezing. Show me what you can really do, yuck. I lifted my arms and dropped my fists into Thor's back. He shouted, then lifted me up and German suplexed me into the ground, cratering it. I barely felt it. I wasn't as strong as 4 arms, but I was damn powerful, enough that Thor, despite hurting me, was only giving me an average bruising. I twisted around and punched Thor in the chest, the ground nearby splitting apart as the sand around us rose. Thor grabbed my shoulders and headbutted me, thunder sounding out in the distance before lightning struck. Damn. I scowled, my nose stinging from his blow. Something inside me reveled in the pain, a strange burning sense of anger within me. I ducked the next one and uppercut him back, more sand from the wasteland around us shaking, filling the air with dust that I could somehow see through. Well done. Thor cheered, grinning as he stepped in and blocked my next blow, backhanding me away. Come, Mahmoud, show me what you really have. He punched me again, and I growled before kicking him back, the world quaking with the hit. Above us, a storm gathered, hot wind and sand flying around us as we battled. Something within felt that was appropriate for a fight between Dial and Thor. Victoria Hand/Vice Director of Shebridge. Victoria stared at a screen before her with the image of the section of desert that Dial and Thor were sparring in, her eyes wide. On the screen, 2 massive swirling vortexes like localized storms were clashing. The helpful computer program measuring things identified them as unusual weather patterns. One was identified as the kind Thor had created a few times. The other, however, was new, because the wind surrounding it seemed a symptom of the power behind it. Make sure to update the weather warnings, Victoria said to one of the scientists in the room, looking at a window nearby as rain and sand bounced off the glass. We don't want people in one of the nearby towns freaking out. Jennifer Walters/She-Hulk. This is because of Thor. She-Hulk shouted at Hulk, who only nodded seriously. The two were standing in the hangar, watching as the world outside seemed to go insane. As they stood there watching lightning cross the gray clouds above and felt the ground shake, a Quinjet landed nearby and opened the back. Creel and Steve came out of the jet in their costumes, quickly running over to join them when hail began to fall and hot desert winds picked up tumbleweed to send it flying across the tarmac. What is this? Steve yelled as soon as he was close, holding his shield over his head to let the ice falling from the sky bounce off. We were supposed to help with the graveyard survivors when the weather went nuts. Thor was supposed to train Dial in his Asgardian form. She-Hulk yelled. You think Dial got his powers? Creel shouted over the storm around them, the man switching to a steel form so he could ignore the granules of sand hitting everything. No, Hulk declared, the tall green giant said, his eyes on the storm above. Different. New. Since when are you insightful? Creel mumbled to himself, watching as the Quinjet that had brought them began to shake under the winds assaulting it. Name forgotten. Far away, in a nursing home called Shady Acres, an elderly man's eyes snapped open, gazing on the sky above New York City. Within him, something snapped into focus. 1. Then it faded away. Whatever clarity that had suddenly filled him slowly left, only embers remaining. A small smile rose on the man's face as his mind was once again taken from him. But the tiniest of cracks had appeared, far earlier than it would have before. 1. Sadly, a crack which anyone could take advantage of. The shadows of the world felt change rise and were changed in return as the wind picked up. Mahmoud Shaykh/Dial. Thor lifted me up and slammed my back onto the floor. I gasped out, spittle flying out of my mouth. Something was wrong. I could feel it inside me. Like a secret I knew was being kept from me, something about the world calling out to it. I tried to reach for it as I rose unsteadily to my feet, my fingers digging into the wasteland beneath me, dirt crumbling in my fingers. Are you all right? Thor asked, his eyes worried. There's something, I coughed, clenching my fists. I can feel a power inside me, something more. But it isn't coming to me. I couldn't understand it. Before now, every alien had come with an instinctual ability with their powers. They may not have come with a manual, but a combination of instinct and an excellent children's cartoon franchise to guide me allowed me to easily use every alien I'd gained. It was frustrating, feeling something within me and not even having a clue what it was. Maybe you have my powers, Thor suggested as he frowned thoughtfully. How does this feel? He raised a hand and Mjolnir flew into his palm, lightning surrounding the badass weapon. He held out in front of me, electricity flowing from it. Anything. I pulled my head back, squinting my eyes against the blinding white light. I feel like you're threatening to electrocute me, does that help? Ah, sorry, Thor embarrassed put Mjolnir away at his waist. Well, damn it, I wish my father was here, Thor sighed, looking as though he was half tempted to do something before dismissing the idea. What calls out to you then? What makes you dash? His next words were drowned out by the wind. I waved at some of the dust rising in the air. On instinct, I took a deep breath, reaching within. The sand flying around us drifted away with the wave of my hand. I blinked dumbly. Thor stopped talking. Hesitantly, I waved my hand again. More sand rose from the rocky wasteland with my hand motion. I gritted my teeth, reaching within myself, and clenched a hand. Sand rose up from the ground, swirling upward in a tiny swirling tornado, barely as high as my chest. Sand. Thor said, eyes wide. That. I've never seen that happen before. Cool, I said with a grin. I mentally reached out to the sand, the tightness in my chest fading as I gathered it to come around my feet, gathering underneath my boots. Sand powers. Seems simple, on the surface, until you see what a person with the ability with the power to control sand can really do. And while I couldn't think of any Ben 10 alien with the powers I apparently had, I'd watched Avatar, The Last Airbender, Naruto, and One Piece, and had read Spider-Man. I certainly had plenty of sand-using characters to use as inspiration. 3. So I created a platform of sand and rose up into the sky on a shifting wave of grains that I later heard had gotten to over 110 feet high, letting me soar above the desert with a dumb grin on my face. Thor spun Mjolnir around and launched after me. Whoa! I shouted, standing with my arms spread on the wave of sand and shooting across the desert on the platform I'd created. The tightness in my chest was gone entirely, relaxed from finally using my powers. I twisted my hands and suddenly I was inside the wave. I laughed with joy as I surfed inside a tube of brown grains, boots sliding across the dirt. Thor flew by, the storm above us dropping lightning around us as he searched for me. Mahmoud. He called out to me. This is awesome. I yelled to him. Hold on, I want to try something. I reached out to the sand. Gaara had been able to do some cool stuff in Naruto, including making statues. I reached out to the sand with my mind, trying to mold it. The desert shook as I reached for the grains and forced them to move, ignoring the tight pain in my chest. The loud sound of the Omnitrix's beeping was followed by the watch timing out. Just like that, I was in my normal human form, and the wave of sand fell apart, leaving me to fall out of the sky. My Kadam armor surrounded me the instant the AI registered a possibly lethal fall, but that still left me spinning through the air. Yaeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeee Thor said, bring us down for a landing. We came to a landing as the tan waves of brown came down. The wasteland, once a place of dried stone cracked from the immense heat, now had a large dune right in the middle of it. I stared up at it as the rain above us continued to fall, wind picking up granules and blowing them away. I was feeling pretty jazzed. I mean, that was insanely awesome. Asgardians are supposed to be strong after all, and this form was epic, man. Ah, man. That was so freaking cool. Weird I timed out so fast though, especially when I made sure to wait so it was charged. Should I just wait to try again? No. I blinked, looking at Thor. He looked contemplative. We need to wait for my father. I don't know what to do with sand. He blinked. Why is it even sand? No Asgardian has dealt with sand as far as I know. Can't blame them, I said, seeing my chance and taking it. It's coarse and rough and it gets everywhere. Thor frowned. Is that a reference? I think Steve mentioned something about that. Captain America had watched the prequels. It truly was the darkest timeline. Chapter 72, Oversized Kitten. When we got to the base again, Creel and Steve had shown up, and the graveyard survivors had come out of the APC that had brought them so they could start their testing. Creel was standing by the door waiting for us when Thor and I dropped in. Thor put me down gently on the ground and we walked up to him. I looked between Thor and Creel for a moment, noting that Hulk was speaking with Marion nearby. In another universe, Creel, the absorbing man, would be a bitter enemy of both Hulk and Thor. Here, Creel, known as the hero Alloy, was their ally. Alloy the ally. Creel nodded at Thor, then looked at me. You guys caused a hell of a ruckus. It was true. The once clean base was kind of a mess. Sand was everywhere, piled up in corners, soaked from the rain that had been falling, while bits of hail melted in the heat of the desert and turned the sand into mud. Sorry, Thor and I said in unison, both of us looking contrite. Creel snorted, then turned and walked towards the section of the base set aside for the survivors. The survivors who had volunteered, that is. Of the group the Omnitrix had healed, most of them had simply wanted to go home, to find some semblance of safety and peace after years of torture. Director Maria Hill had those people put into a program being developed just for that. For people who suddenly got powers and never wanted them, or wanted to make a life of their own. It was complicated. A lot of the group were enhanced to be almost as strong as Steve and Bucky, while others had limited versions of Creel's powers. The idea of them out in the world and causing trouble, or using their abilities for profit in unfair ways, was something that worried the people in charge. After all, what's the point of sports if you know the other team has a guy who can lift trucks over their shoulders and treat 10Ks like light warm-ups? 2. That was still being discussed, but here on the base were those few who had decided they wanted to use their powers to join Bridge in one way or another. The section set aside for them was formerly the school for the children on the base, using the gymnasium for the main testing, the classrooms to organize everyone, and the locker rooms to give them somewhere to change into some sweats. Creel walked us into the gymnasium and everyone stopped to look over at us. For a moment, things were awkward. Then, like something out of a movie, one guy started clapping. A few others joined in until a large portion of the room was clapping while looking over at us. 4 of them, all wearing Bridge-issued workout clothes, walked over as Thor and I blinked in confusion, though he was apparently more used to applause than I was. The people walking toward us were showing signs of their powers in some ways. The oldest one was a tall and well-built black man, with piercing eyes and a steady confidence, his muscles piled on muscles as he walked towards us. He strode towards us and smiled at me. Surprised, when I didn't say anything, he chuckled. I figured. Not every day you get a standing ovation from the people you saved. Well, shit. What was I supposed to say to that? That was a hell of an honor to be given. I kind of shuffled awkwardly, not knowing what I should do. The younger black man behind him gave me a brooding look. He looked like the older man, if lighter in size, but still built like an armored truck. He nodded respectfully but said nothing else. A teenage girl waved timidly at us. She was tall and almost alarmingly skinny, right on the edge of looking unhealthy. Her purple hair had the look of someone who had recently dyed it. The final woman looked like someone's mom, with white streaks in her hair, some wrinkles on her skin, and a slightly too big smile. She reminded me of a Korean woman I'd known on my world, with a similar nose and eyes with the same kindness. I'm Jamal, the older man introduced himself. This is Mike, the young man nodded. Abigail, purple hair shuffled nervously. And Young Moon, the oldest woman smiled at us. We were the ones chosen to represent our little group. 2. Nice to meet you all, Thor said kindly. Same from me, I added weakly as the clapping died down. I noted that none of their names were familiar. Not people from the comics. Civilians, who would have died nameless otherwise. Thank you, Omnitrix. Creel spoke next. So far, it looks like only the absorbers like me and the super soldiers like Steve have powers. Only one gamma-enhanced being kept its powers, and it's an animal. I blinked at that, but he continued before I could question him. Young Moon, show them what you got. The older woman reached into a pocket and pulled out a piece of red stone. She clenched her hand around it and immediately shifted into a rock statue in a kaleidoscope of random colors. Young Moon chuckled, her lips the color of emeralds, and spoke in Korean. Thor chuckled as well. Indeed, my lady, you are quite beautiful in this form, he said kindly, getting the older woman to blush. You speak Korean? Jamal asked curiously. A benefit of being Asgardian. I am gifted with the ability to speak in all Midgardian languages, as well as those of other realms, the god of thunder explained. I didn't say anything. I mean, the Omnitrix worked the same way with its universal translator, but it wasn't information I threw around. Never know when you might need to overhear something after all. 2. Dial. I turned to see Jennifer yelling towards me, the tall Gamazon attracting attention from the people working out. A guy who was bench pressing around 500 pounds of weight near her started going really fast, probably to impress her, only to go faster when she rewarded his efforts with a wink. She turned back to me, ignoring the guy currently burning out. Hulk wants you to see this. 1. Steve walked up to join us from a group of people doing squats with car engines, sweating a bit. Any idea what that is about? He asked. Who knows? I ran towards She-Hulk, leaving the awkwardness of everyone staring at me. Technically, I had saved them, but only because I had a really cool watch. When you boiled things down, all of my victories were often the Omnitrix's victories with an assist from me. Getting treated as though I'd done something great when I did the alien tech equivalent of pressing a button just made me feel as though I was cheating everyone. She-Hulk led me outside to a dirt field covered in sand and hail, with a series of pens set up. The place looked like a hastily set up zoo, the pens made of all thick metal and plastic spaced evenly to keep those within from escaping. Huh, I said as the cacophony of sounds surrounded me. I forgot how many there were. Dogs and cats were the common ones. One was familiar, and apparently, he remembered me, because the little guy started barking loudly and wagging his tail as I passed. I remembered him when he changed into a steel form, grinning brightly at me with sunlight reflecting off metal fur. We walked past him, and I noted a cat that was about twice as large as a normal house cat, with corded muscle underneath its gray fur. A lady in a lab coat was in his pen trying to get the guy to do something with a rubber ball. With the typical sassy attitude all cats have, he cocked an eyebrow, rolled over on his muscular stomach, and went to sleep, the lady in his pen sagging in disappointment. 2. Past those normal animals were the more wild fare. Monkeys with ABS or the ability to change into different materials, a rhino with enhanced eyesight, according to a scientist studying the massive animal, and more. 2. We ended up at an 18-wheeler truck, where a large group was waiting nervously outside of it. Hulk stood nearby, his arms crossed and gazed steadily on the being within. The large truck was open at the back, with a familiar being within. I walked over next to Hulk, who turned to look down at me. He nodded towards the truck, walking forward with me. As men with guns watched us walk up, the being inside looked up at me. I reached for the Omnitrix and began flipping through the menu before smiling at the guy within. Hey, buddy. I guess you're the only one who kept those gamma powers, aren't you? The tiger inside looked at me, green eyes blinking lazily. He rested in a massive pen with by far the thickest bars of any of the other cages. Even then, I could see that they had been bent outward by some powerful force. Clearly, that was the fault of the green and black furred guy inside. He was about as big as a small car and, you know what, let's not mince words. You look like Battle Cat, I said, moving deeper into the truck. The tiger blinked at me, then at Hulk when he joined me. So what's going on? A scientist about 30 feet behind me yelled. It doesn't want to move. Every time we get near him he freaks out. Haven't you tried a stake or something to attract him? I called back. He has enhanced intelligence. He stopped taking bribes about 3 days in, and he hasn't changed into a normal tiger since. The scientist sounded like he was at the end of his rope. We need to get him into one of the other pens so we can scan it properly. He's the only one who kept gamma powers, but he was recorded as lacking the gamma gene, the scientist yelled. He yelped when the tiger lazily yawned. She-Hulk hopped in as well, looking over us. So, what's the plan? Hulk help Kitty. Goddamn, how did he manage to make that sound tough? He strode forward and the tiger slowly backed away as the shadow of the Hulk went over the cage. He reached out and grabbed the door to the cage. Buddy, maybe we should dash, I started to say. Rack. With a single pull, Hulk ripped the door off the cage. Sure, let's do that. I weakly reached for the Omnitrix, ready to transform as the tiger stared between the three of us. Is this a good idea? She-Hulk asked as she stepped in front of me. I don't know, this whole thing took a direction I didn't expect at all, I admitted. The tiger moved forward slowly. I began to press on the Omnitrix, ready for any random action that followed. If someone had sneezed, I'd have changed into Diamond Head immediately. She-Hulk raised her hands up. Hulk was unmoved, his back to us as the tiger began to walk out. Soon, a tiger about as big as the rhino outside was out of the cage. It looked around at us, focusing on me. Then it strode towards me. I reached for the watch. Stop, Hulk said calmly, well, as calmly as Hulk could, raising a hand. Wait. For what? My throat to get ripped out? I asked tensely. The tiger went up to me and started sniffing. If you've ever had a giant super muscular tiger sniff at you, I'm sorry. Because damn, there is nothing like seeing the fangs of a tiger shine in your face as its sniffing blows your hair back. It was that kind of primal fear deep down in your brain that stretched all the way back from the beginning of man dodging large predators in Africa. After a bit, it surprised me by licking my arm, then moving to wrap around me and lie on the ground, going to sleep. Hulk grinned as She-Hulk and I shared a look. I don't understand, I said slowly. I took a moment to try and remember if there was a precedent for a gamma tiger in the comics. Nothing came to mind. Guess even meta-knowledge isn't perfect. Hulk good with animals, the big guy said in a satisfied tone. I hesitantly stepped away. The tiger woke immediately and stood up, walking along with me. Trying something out, I moved out of the truck. Walking out of the truck with the super tiger placidly following me was a weird experience. The personnel stared at him as he hopped out, his green fur almost glowing in the sunlight. Hulk and Jennifer followed, Hulk looking satisfied and Jennifer like she was seconds from laughing but couldn't because of how confused she was. Sir, one of the scientists called out to me. We need to study it? Do you think we can do some more invasive procedures if you can control him? I looked over at the tiger. He blinked lazily at me, looked over at the scientist who'd spoken, then back to me, his muzzle twitching. I rubbed the back of my neck. Dude, I don't know what to tell you. He's kind of doing his own thing right now. Battle cat, do you want to? He growled in the back of his throat, the sound rumbling the ground. He says no, Hulk added helpfully. Cats. What are you gonna do? She-Hulk said helplessly. Not much else we could say to that I suppose. I walked towards the pens. Sir, we can't let you dash, a soldier began to say. I reached for the Omnitrix and pressed down on it. In a flash of green light, red armored skin grew across my body along with a pair of extra arms and eyes as I towered over all present. 4 arms. The echo of my voice shook the area, the cacophony of animals petering out. Don't worry. I'll keep my eyes on the big guy. I think we need to figure out what the hell to do with him. Holy shit, you are big, She-Hulk mumbled, looking up at me with wide eyes. I grinned. You're one to talk, Shulky. Yeah, I am, Rulk, she said with a grin. 1. I barked out a laugh for more reasons than one as we walked over to a pen with more soldiers surrounding us. Hulk gestured to the tiger, who walked inside with the austere grace of an emperor. Once inside, the pen closed up, and the tiger sat back on its haunches, tail sweeping back and forth across the ground. Once inside, the scientists began tapping at screens, and Hand walked over, her eyes widening at the sight of my towering form, before looking at the tiger. What happened? Victoria asked, crossing her arms. I think, I said hesitantly. The Pet Avengers got their first member. The what? Victoria said in the tone of voice a woman uses when she's slowly going insane. 1. We've got a bunch of animals with superpowers, a lot of them more intelligent than they should be. I think people were going to talk about that soon enough anyway. As Victoria sighed in annoyance at what she thought was a joke, I thought about the moon and a certain founding member of the Pet Avengers. Going to have to look into that soon. Even as I thought that Thor came out of the doors of the gymnasium and head towards us, apparently wondering about the commotion. What dash he stopped, staring up at me. He noted the Omnitrix symbol and blinked. My, you're a big one. That's what she said, I noted, thinking of She-Hulk's reaction. 1. When the tittering laughter followed, I realized what that sounding like and groaned slightly, putting my lower right hand to my face. That was an accident, I swear. That's what she said. She-Hulk responded, laughing all the harder at the annoyed look I gave her. 1. How strong are you? Thor asked, rubbing his chin with a look in his eyes the Tetraman form I was borrowing knew all too well as the look of challenge. 1. Don't, Victoria mumbled. You two can spar later. Right now I need to rest. Testing went well after that chapter 73, F***CK it's Wakanda. Ulysses Clay. In another part of the world, a man by the name of Clay walked through the bowels of his base, a shipwrecked and beat up old tanker. He liked it for several reasons. First, because he liked the word bowels under most circumstances. Bowels. Second, because the atmosphere just fit so perfectly with what he was doing. Damn it. He was an arms dealer, not some namby-pamby wannabe mob boss. Who gave a shit if he was making more money than most kings off of the business, he was still selling guns. Why idiots like Sonny Birch worked out of fancy restaurants and penthouse apartments, Clay never understood. If something did the job and did the job well, why spend extra money off expensive crap to replace that? The tanker was solid, in the middle of nowhere, easy to defend, and cheap as hell, since, well, no one gave a crap about it. Which made it perfect to hide things like missiles and vibranium in, funnily enough. Clay strode through the tanker, walking past his men as they organized things for sale and storage. He had good guys, even if they were a little stiff sometimes. No taste for fun on the job. He grinned with a flash of silver teeth as he walked into his office and looked out over his crappy little base, feeling a hint of pride at what he saw. Yep. Today was going to be a good day. Oh crap, he'd tempted fate. Clay waited for a moment. When nothing happened, he relaxed, going over to his desk and grabbing a piece of candy from a bowl. Then the power in the boat suddenly shut off, leaving them in darkness. That's when the screaming began to echo through the boat. Fuck, I knew it. Clay grabbed the gun on his desk and ran out the door. Outside, his men were panicking. Oh come on idiots, are you kidding? Grab guns and shoot something. Clay grinned. Get the big ones too, have some fun. Some of his men in the shadows yelled out affirmatives, and soon the sound of bullets filled the air. Until another sound responded. The familiar sound of a sonic weapon finally made Clay's grin fall away. Wakanda. Fuck, he turned and ran as more sounds filled the air, the darkness lit up with blue lights. Worse was the quiet sections. The moments when someone shooting a gun suddenly disappeared in the shadows without a sound. That could not have been good. Clay went deeper into the tanker, aiming for the back where a way out had been built. Except that as he ran across the catwalks, the sounds seemed to follow him with relentless ease. Damn it, had to happen today of all days. Clay spat out running along with his pistol tight in hand. He got to a door and grabbed at the wheel to unlock it, twisting hard and pushing it open with a bit of trouble. Come on you damn, Grack. Pushing his way through, he cursed aloud when a sonic weapon hit a wall nearby. Adrenaline pushed him forward. He aimed his gun back as he ran through the halls, shooting his gun behind him at whoever it was that was following him. The bullet bounced off of the blue light, but he continued running despite that, his legs pumping. He could see the exit now, an opening leading to the garage full of cars in the boat. Just needed to get in there, hop into one of the SUVs, then head to Johannesburg and meet with one of his people. Clay entered the garage and slapped a button on the wall, the gate at the end opening up and ran past some vehicles towards the SUV in question. Once inside of it, he grabbed the keys out of the middle compartment and put it in the ignition. Okay, no horror movie shit, got it. Clay twisted the key and grinned at the instantaneous sound of the car engine roaring to life. There's a good girl. Pressing on the accelerator, the car rushed forward, heading to the gate. He passed through it at about 50 miles an hour. Something ran at him from the side, slamming into the car like a missile. The car twisted at the hit, slamming into the edge of the gate as it left the tanker. The car spun out of control. Whatever had hit the SUV spun upward and grabbed the hood, a round object landing on the black metal. Whatever it was, the disc seemed to cause the car to lose power, leaving Clay twisting at a useless steering wheel. The SUV rolled to a weak stop on the dirt. Clay cursed, getting out of the car, only to have a black shadow separate from the SUV and rise in front of him. Well, you're a sight better looking than your da was, boy, Clay said weakly. Black Panther stood before him in the sunlight, dressed in the black armor and cat-like helmet that represented the panther habit. He stepped forward and grabbed Clay by the lapel, pushing him into the SUV. Behind him, explosions came from the tanker that had once been Clay's home, a group of women in red armor moving towards them from it. Damn it, you all really caught me at a bad moment, Clay said to the Amazonian women striding towards him, giving them a roguish grin. Tell you what ladies, let me get my makeup kit and my nice suit, you come back when I'm a bit prettier. The 5 women stopped and gave him looks like stone. Black Panther reached a hand back and received a syringe from one of the women. Okay, can you not? Clay said with a grimace. I promised I'd stop with the hard stuff, took a program and everything. Black Panther injected the syringe into his neck. Damn, I was going to get my 3-year chip. As Clay passed out, Black Panther let out a sigh of relief. I wish my father had warned me he would talk that much. Mahmoud Sheikh/dial. On returning to New York City, after all the rounds of testing had been done, I was left in my room, where I made a phone call. After ringing for a bit, the line picked up. Matt Murdock speaking, the man on the other end said. Hey Matt, it's Mahmoud. I got your email. You said you wanted me to call. Yes. How do you know? He said, as though he was asking a casual question and not one loaded with C4. I took a moment to tap the back of my phone, a beeping signaling that X was keeping anyone from listening in. About the fact that your site was replaced with. I don't know, just insanely powerful everything else? Am I close? Matt was quiet on the other end for a bit. When he spoke, his tone was somewhat like Bucky's when he was seconds from punching a punk. And I lived in Hell's Kitchen for a few, so I did hear about a man in black mask beating up thugs. I'm guessing that was you. Combined with working with a worldwide spy organization with access to every camera in existence. Makes sense, Matt said. So what do you want? More good guys in the world, I said simply. That's it. I'm a superhero now, I guess, but my powers mean I'm going to be called to help on a worldwide scale. I won't be able to always patrol in New York like I used to. So if there are some people willing to do the same, I want to help. That's all. Who else knows? Matt asked. Me, maybe some people in Bridge. I thought of a certain redhead who had mentioned Matt to me the other day, but doesn't look like it for the most part, since your abilities aren't exactly flashy. But I'm not going to tell anyone. Anyone finds out, it's on their own. He sighed in annoyance. I walked around my apartment in the Avengers Tower, going over to a window and looking over the city quietly. Well, your deal seems legit, Matt said at last. And you say you want to help me. How about we meet up and talk about it? I asked. We can make some initial plans, maybe show you that working together is the best way to protect New York? Beat up some assholes on patrol a few times together. Matt chuckled. Sure, let's meet tonight. After making plans, I looked out into New York again, thinking. I was personally one of the most powerful beings on Earth, when given the chance to press down on the Omnitrix. But I could still be killed. And Hell's Kitchen was dangerous before I became a household name. People might shoot from the distance to prove a point. Might need some protection. Luckily, I had a friend with a room down the hall from mine. Later that night, Natasha and I were walking through New York City together. She was wearing a leather jacket and red shirt, her red hair curly and long around her neck. I was wearing a black widow shirt, just to be funny, the sleeves golden and the rest of it black, with a red logo in the center sort of reminding me of the one I had on the Omnitrix, a red backpack swinging as I walked with the super assassin. We were walking down West 44th Street in Hell's Kitchen. If you've never been, I don't recommend it as a tourist site. It's basically every seedy part of New York all bundled into a couple of blocks, complete with a bunch of guys on all the street corner leering at people and making threats or crooning promises to show you a good time to any girl with legs and a face. That wasn't to say there weren't any good people there, in fact there were more of those than there were assholes. It was a good town, at its core. Even then, I don't think either Natasha or I were surprised when a trio of guys walked over towards us from down the street, ambling our way with a lazy confidence. Right up until Natasha carelessly flipped her hair and opened her jacket a bit. The two small pistols revealed by the action were a mistake on her part, I'm sure, as was the long blade at her waist. Note my sarcasm of course, since I doubt much Natasha did was ever by mistake. Same with the way her walk went from casual stride of a woman going from point A to point B, to the long and dangerous catwalk of a killer. The difference was subtle. See, the first was walking. The second was walking while seconds away from stabbing a punk in the heart with a smile on your face. The three guys quickly found something else to look at, the vicious smiles turning into carefully neutral looks on their faces. I really need to learn how to do that, I told Natasha as we walked down the road, passing our would-be attackers. It's all in the hips, Natasha said with a smirk. I'll teach you one day. Yeah, but I don't have hips as nice as yours, I quipped. Natasha chuckled. Should I tell Sky and Jen you're hitting on me, too? If you want to, but I'll tell everyone about all the weird sexual encounters your alternate universe selves had. I nudged her with an elbow. Like the one where you had sex with Tony. At least I had high standards, Natasha smiled before she frowned a bit. Wait, is this the one where I turned out to be a traitor? That's a stone every person we know can't throw, I admitted. Even Steve had a Hydra moment in one universe. Steve, Natasha said, sounding genuinely shocked. That doesn't even sound real. Yeah, it took a bunch of weird cosmic mumbo-jumbo for that to go down, I shrugged. Natasha was basically one of the few people I could talk about other universes without her going existential on me every few minutes. The others would likely spend a few days looking at the horizon, rethinking existence. Natasha rolled with it. The world was the world, and Natasha wasn't going to waste it comparing herself to other versions of herself. I had no idea if that was a healthy attitude, but I had to admire it. Considering I'd had a nightmare once of an evil Ben tracking me down I focused on the street around us. Where did they say we should turn? Let's see. Natasha looked around. Body, right down there. She nodded down towards a street a couple of blocks away. Right. Hey, thanks for this, Nat. Keeping it secret and everything, I said gratefully. No problem, she looked at me. You know you'll owe me after this though. Owing the Black Widow seems like a dangerous prospect. By the way, how come you kept that name? Isn't it kind of edgy? She laughed. Yeah, I guess so. But apparently, the marketing people said that the image works for me. We turned around the corner, walking down Body. Yeah, the whole dangerous super spy thing must have been a stretch. You mentioned that a lot, Nat said, giving me a look. Does it bother you? My history? You said you've seen everything all the alternate versions of me did. Do you worry about it? I think we had this conversation before, I noted. Come on, Nat. You're one of my mentors now. You know what I think of you. We walked for a bit longer. You're painfully naive sometimes. Getting better. But still naive, she smiled at me. Okay, Mahmoud. One thing I need to ask you as your mentor. Did you even notice Ruby over there? I blinked, then turned. The petite teenager waved at me from where she was walking, an irritating smirk on her face. She was wearing a small black jacket and yoga pants that were slightly big on her, eyes glittering in the light as she twirled a small throwing knife in her fingers before throwing it. I had enough time to blink before Natasha caught it an inch from my right eye. Holy shit. You're fine, Natasha said with a grin as she put away the knife, nodding at Ruby, who turned into an alley. We're going to be training you on counter-espionage soon though. Heart still in my throat, I followed Natasha towards our destination. It was a bar called Josie's as the red neon sign on the right window and the gold lettering on the left window said proudly. A bunch of motorcycles were parked out in front, a few tough guys standing around the front wearing their gang's colors on the jackets, or sewn onto their jeans. Nat calmly walked up and opened the door, the bikers ignoring us, and we stepped in. The place was full of people, from all walks of life. They were drinking. Because it was a bar after all. The place smelled like piss and alcohol, with a slight aroma of vomit joining in. Someone had hung an air freshener near the door, like a drop of water added to the desert in terms of usefulness. Hey, Dial. Foggy yelled from the back, coming up to grin at me. He was wearing his shirt and tie, the sleeves rolled up and a pool cue in his hand. How's it Irk? He stopped, blinking at the sight of Natasha, then smiling. Black Widow. Nat, actually, she said with a smile. And you're Mr. Nelson, right? Foggy, please, the pudgy and good-natured man said with that wide grin of his. I can't call an Avenger by her name and have her call me Mr. Nelson. Natasha blinked at that, then smiled that lazy and smooth smile she seemed to save for the right moments. Foggy coughed, then waved at the back. Right this way, Nat. She walked past him, leaving Foggy to look over at me. You couldn't have warned me that I was bringing her along, I said with a cocked eyebrow. Well, things are sort of getting crazy in New York City. She's acting as my bodyguard. We joined Matt in the back, who was hesitantly feeling at a pool table, gently making sure of the placement of each ball on the green felt, dressed much the same as Foggy was at the moment, sleeves rolled up and all. Matt, Foggy said as we joined him. He's here. And he brought a friend. Oh. Matt cocked his head, not looking at us. Hello, Mr. Shaft. And your friend is? Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow told the future Daredevil. Matt smiled. Matthew Murdock. You're an Avenger, right? And a few other things, Natasha responded. Matt chuckled. Mr. Shaft, you could have warned us you were bringing company, we would have met somewhere more classy. This place is plenty classy, Foggy said. I mean, look, my drink has something alive in it. He raised a beer, showing the shadowy shape in the dark yellow liquid. You can't get that sort of exotic flavor anywhere else. You don't like it, get out, a woman behind the bar yelled. It's all part of your charm, Josie. Foggy yelled back. He turned back to us. Seriously, I don't recommend drinking the water here. Natasha chuckled. Don't worry, I've been in worse places. There was a bar in Budapest I can tell you stories about. 3. Okay, so, Matt strolled around, carefully following the pool table's edge with his hands. Some of the patrons avoided him with what looked like practiced ease, one big biker moving a stool out of his way without a thought. You said you wanted to hire us. We agree with your terms. We'll be your lawyers from now on, Mr. Shaft. I grinned. Cool. There is one unexpected thing. We recently got a new Avenger, a woman named Jennifer Walters. She's a damn good lawyer, just did some work on the West Coast. She's looking to continue her work in law, and she was hoping she could talk to you guys about it. I held up my hands before they could speak. I know how it looks, me adding a lawyer to your group right after I gave you my word that I wasn't going to interfere, but I swear, this is just me asking on her behalf. I told her what you guys want to do, and she wants to meet you. Foggy and Matt shared a look. After a bit, Matt sighed. Mr. Shaft, you say she's already a lawyer, right? Why can't she simply rejoin her firm? I rubbed the back of my head. Just take my word for it. Besides, she wants to move here, do some work in this city. Doing it on the side of being an Avenger of course. Just meet her. Natasha spoke up. I do suggest it. She recently took down Nicholas Trask. It was a hell of a thing. We were going to have her join Bridges' group of attorneys, but she wants to work with you. Matt smiled. That seems like a good idea. That said, Matt walked over to a table with their jackets and bags resting there, taking a familiar folder out and walking over to me in a series of slow and careful movements. It was kind of annoying, considering I knew for a fact the guy was better without eyes than I was with them, but I still managed to wait patiently as he handed me the folder. We've both signed. You are officially the first client of Nelson and Murdoch. I'm the first guy to give you money, I corrected him, opening the folder and smiling at the signatures. In some worlds, I bet a signature from Matt Murdoch and Foggy Nelson would be worth a hell of a lot. I closed the folder again. Your first client will be whatever person you guys actually help with a case. You count, Foggy said easily. So, business is done, how about we play a game or two? Natasha cocked an eyebrow. 2 on 2 with a blind man on one team? Isn't that a little unfair? No offense, Mr. Murdoch. None taken, Mrs. Romanoff, Matt said. Nat, she corrected. Nat, Matt showed her a charming smile. Tell you what, you can be on my team, and I might surprise you. Oh come on, Foggy grumbled under his breath, though he smiled good-naturedly. What? Matt asked, sounding confused. Foggy shrugged. Oh nothing, just seeing a pattern in play. Okay, I'll take the other Avenger then. Rack 'em up. After thoroughly getting my ass kicked alongside Foggy in pool, the friendly lawyer said his goodbyes and walked off into the night. With him gone, Matt lost his good humor. We stepped out of Josie's, walked down the street until we got to 47th Street, then turned into a dark alley. Once inside, Matt listened for a moment. Someone is coming, he said. That's Ruby. Natasha looked down the alley. Come here. You should listen to this part. Soon, a short assassin teen came around the corner, flashing me a smirk. In retort, I carefully flashed the Omnitrix, and her smirk faded. She looked over at Matt and scowled. How the hell did you sense me? He's a special case, Natasha explained. I'll train you to do better later. Matt looked uncertainly at her but listened again. Okay, we're in the clear, he looked between us. So, does she? I know, Natasha said simply. When Mahmoud asked me to bodyguard him, I checked up on you. You really are blind. Matt nodded. Then you have a lot more agility and spatial awareness than even most people with sight, even better than people in my profession. You hide it well. But every time I came close, you couldn't quite hide the reaction you gave about knowing exactly where I was, she mentioned, sounding honestly impressed. Matt stared at us hesitantly. Is this you asking me to become an Avenger? Not really, Natasha said. This is Mahmoud's deal. He asked me to keep what I hear a secret and to back him up just in case. You're his backup? Matt asked, lips twitching. No offense, but I've seen what you can do on the news, Mr. Sheikh. What do you need backup from? 1. Snipers, I admitted. Ninjas as well, just in case. Ninjas? In New York City? Matt asked, disbelieving. Yes, I said simply. Ignoring the look on his face, I removed the large red backpack I'd been carrying and put it on the ground between us. So, I, officially, can tell you that Bridge is working with New York City on developing a program for superhumans to aid police officers on patrol, as part of a plan to make such programs more of a permanent thing, as well as upgrading officers to deal with superhuman threats on their own as needed. A group of secret warriors, if you will. I need to stop stealing names from the main Marvel universe. So you'll get an invite if you want it, and Maria Hill is going to make sure those who join can have the option to hide their identities. Matt seemed to sag in relief at that. That would be really nice. It's something we're still fighting for, but it should come soon, I added. There will be some rules, something you'll have to do on the up and up, all in the name of letting you help people without worrying about cops shooting at you or guys getting out of prison by claiming they were beat up by a random vigilante on the street. But, until that time, you'll need something to protect you. Something better than a black shirt and scarf around your face. He laughed nervously, looking over at Nat and Ruby. The redhead and blonde smirked at him. They won't talk, I said with a smile. Trust me, Nat is good people. And Ruby won't do anything to piss Nat off. Screw you, Ruby said to me without looking. Gain a few feet first, midget, I answered back, getting a disgusted scoff in return. Brat. Anyways, I made you this. I tapped the top of the red backpack. The catams that made up the backpack flowed up my arm, revealing what was held within. A costume lay on the pavement before Matt, folded neatly on the ground. He kneeled down and put his hand against the helmet, blinking. Is this dash? A suit, custom made for you, I answered. I could give you any advanced gear you feel might be missing, but of course nothing Bridge uses. But the suit is bullet, fire, and slash resistant. It'll take a lot of damage and leave you bruised at most, but it's also made to let you move with all the agility of, well, the three of you. I gestured at the three badasses around me, Ruby smiling proudly. It's also got a feature to let you close off your hearing in case anyone tries to use it against you. Like I said, it's not the best we've got, but dash. No, Matt smiled, lifting the suit to look at it. The combination of dark yellow and red colors seemed to work well, a pair of small devil horns attached to the helmet. He briefly touched the clubs resting at the waist of the costume. It's perfect. Thank you. And these clubs, too. It's all in here. I tossed him a flash drive, which he snatched out of the air. It's got a manual to let you know everything they can do, even has a printable version in Braille for yourself. It ain't an Iron Man suit, but it's damn good. Daredevil, I started seriously. There are some people, in Hell's Kitchen, that I want to check up on tomorrow night. Where should we meet? Matt asked. In a minute, but before we go any further there is something I want to do and I think you would really appreciate it. I started to say and couldn't keep the huge grin off my face. Yeah? Any more toys for me? Sadly, state law says blind men can't drive, so I will have to turn down a devil mobile. He joked but still seemed interested. You'll like this better. This wouldn't be in the news, but the forms I turn into are actually different kinds of aliens. Natasha made a noise of annoyance at me casually sharing such privileged information since Bridge was keeping it under wraps under the excuse of worrying the public, despite the fact these aliens don't exist in this universe as far as I knew. I ignored her. The one I'm about to use is one I think you will have an instant connection with, I said, and before he could respond to that I quickly activated the Omnitrix and pressed down the selection I had set beforehand. In a flash of green the first was covered in orange fur, standing on 4 powerful legs, had an impressive set of teeth, and of course, my eyesight disappeared even as my vision expanded more fully than my human senses could ever achieve. While everyone else looked away from bright flash, Matt obviously didn't and was quick to see the change I had undergone. He hesitated for a second before reaching his hands out and feeling around Wild Mutt's head where the eyes would be on most other creatures before pulling back. No eyes, so that means. Matt worked it out quickly and Nat answered for him. Wild Mutt seems to rely more on smell than echolocation like you, but that doesn't mean his hearing is any lesser for it. Well, Nat said with what I assumed was a smirk from Matt's likely gobsmacked expression. Ruby smelled annoyed as she spoke under her breath. Why did my life get so weird lately? Was it weird that Wild Mutt seemed able to smell emotions? Likely worked better on other Vulpamancers, but I couldn't help but let out a series of barks that would be laughs with human vocal cords. Chapter 74, Pym. January 23, 2014. Steve Rogers / Captain America. Still no sign of him, Maria Hill said, walking back and forth through her office. Phil Coulson and Steve Rogers stood before her, both men sharing a look. They stood in the Enterprise, which Maria was still using as her main base of operations. There had been plans to repair the Triskelion and return to it, but Maria said she simply found it easier to use the Enterprise as a mobile HQ considering the way her work was going. She really needed to be able to work in the field. Maybe one day the Triskelion would return to its former glory, though Steve doubted it. For now, Maria stopped in the center of the room and looked between them. The last record we have of Strucker, he was in Brazil, working from some old bases Hydra had built during the time Nazis fled to the country after the war, but authorities and our own forces there found nothing but dead ends. So either we can't find him, or he was never there at all, Coulson concluded, crossing his arms. The agent sounded frustrated and tired as he spoke. Looks like it, Steve agreed. He held back the anger he felt at the thought. Strucker still had Sharon and Trip, two of their people, in the hands of Hydra, likely getting brainwashed and experimented upon. It was enough to give anyone nightmares. On the plus side, other Hydra bases have been falling apart. I have our people going over it and it looks like we have quite a few new resources. Quinjets, weapons, materials, fuel, even food we can shift to feed our soldiers. Steve nodded at that. No matter what else had changed, wars were won by supplies as much as soldiers. It was common sense after all. Just in case, maybe we should have Dial and Tony update the Hercules app? That might help with the search. Something to make sure that any items we pick up aren't booby-trapped would be good as well. Agreed, Phil said. In the meantime, we have another issue. Hank Pym is still refusing to speak with us, Maria said simply. Steve looked between them, confused. Hank Pym, a former S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist, Phil explained. He stopped working with us after an incident, but he's known as one of the most intelligent people we ever had. Worked on something pretty damn secretive. I think only Agent Carter knew the full details of it. He was also the founder of Pym Technologies before he was removed by a corporate takeover. So why are we talking about him now? Steve asked. Maria, in answer, waved her hand. Hologram emitters in the ceiling and floor activated, projecting a screen showing Bill Foster's lab. Steve held back a sigh at the sight of it. He hated most holograms. They never seemed to be as clear as the normal flat-screen TVs of the modern age were. Holograms Steve usually saw were fuzzy and all blue. They were also very tough to discern distance from. A few exceptions, such as the holograms Dial, Fitz, or Tony sometimes made, were much closer to reality, but the one Maria brought up was annoyingly tough to figure out. With a bit of squinting, he was able to follow along with the events of Ava's test, past the moment something went wrong and finishing when Bill asked Fitz to call Maria. According to Bill, Ava said Janet was in her mind, Maria said with a quiet solemnness. We believe it's Janet Pym she's talking about, Hank's wife and a former S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist. If she is somehow in the quantum realm like Bill suspects, we need to talk to Hank Pym, but he won't speak with us. Let me try. I have a very persuasive personality, Phil said with a smile. Are you sure? Maria asked. I know you're still getting over, well, everything. Phil stilled. After a sad smile, his words came out with a deeply pained tone. Audrey made her choice. I accept that. And in the end, Ava and Janet are the ones we need to focus on. I can take my team with me to meet with Hank, tell him about what we've found out. 1. Fury opened the door then, walking into the room. He no longer wore his long coat, instead wearing a blue silk shirt and white suspenders. He strode in and nodded at everyone. You're talking about Pym? Yes, Maria answered. I'd like to suggest not telling him about Janet, Fury said simply. Phil frowned, Steve doing the same. Phil spoke, turning slightly to face Fury. Why? Wouldn't knowing we might have information on her help? What do we have? Fury asked. A woman who has been in constant pain since childhood, saying a name she might have overheard in the middle of a dangerous experiment with quantum energy? Hank Pym is the sort of guy who will punch you in the face the second he hears that. Come to think of it, maybe you should have May say it. Very funny, Phil said, getting a smirk from Fury. Phil sighed. All right, I'll just go ahead. We need to visit California as is, so this works out. All right, Maria said. Then we come to your orders, Rogers, Fury. The two old soldiers looked over at her. As you know, we need a training facility for the superhumans we've been finding. Somewhere safe, where they can learn in peace and eventually either return to the world or begin working for us. I want you both looking at the old S.H.I.E.L.D. bases and finding us a good location for that. Somewhere out of the way, with lots of destructible area around it for the more powerful superhumans we'll find. If it can survive Dial, Hulk, and Thor, you've found somewhere we can work with. Steve, you know the Avengers best, so find somewhere they can all use as a secondary base as well. Director for a short time and already giving impossible orders. Fury asked with a slight smirk. You really were the best choice. Maria spared him a smile before waving for them to leave. Steve walked out with the group, thinking carefully. A training base for superhumans. One that could survive most anything, had room, was out of the way, hidden, and was comfortable. Tough combination to figure out. Tony might have some ideas about that. For some reason though, Steve felt as though the Avengers and other superhumans would need something specific. Something was calling him to make sure the base would be best to keep that idea on a back burner. If it ended up being viable, he'd take it. For now, he turned to Fury. What do you think about asking Tony about financing the base? I think he'll be an insufferable asshole about it. But sure, Fury said with a sigh of annoyance. Let's go ask Tony Stark for money. Mahmoud /dial. In the gym of the Avengers Tower, in the boxing ring set aside just for the occasion, I unleashed a series of punches at my opponent. Sky ducked around them, swinging her leg to try and sweep me off my feet, but I managed to leap over the attack. I came down with a wrestler-style elbow drop, so she dodged to let me hit the mat instead. She kicked at me and I blocked the blows on my shoulder, grabbing her leg in return. With a quick spin, I heaved her up and tossed her aside. She rolled with the toss, landing and facing me when I followed up with a cross punch. Ducking, she grabbed my arm, pulled it forward while twisting to bring her back to my chest, then flipped me over. I landed hard on my back, grunting at the pain, before bringing my legs up to kick at her. It was a rough attack but one that drove her to run back, allowing me to spin to my feet and follow by punching her in the gut. She backed off. For a moment, Sky and I faced each other. Natasha, who was watching from the ropes with her arms crossed, simply eyed us. Then a loud shout brought our attention to the doors. Ruby was brought in by May, the older woman pushing the tiny teen into the gym with the same sort of dismissive attitude one would use to shove an unruly puppy off a bed. Caught her, huh? Natasha asked easily. She's getting better, May said, sounding almost reluctant. Only realized where she was when the cardboard box moved. 3. What, did she go all Metal Gear on you? I asked, almost shocked. It almost worked, Ruby mumbled to herself, only scowling at the frown that comment got from May. Hey, aren't we still fighting? Sky asked me. I've gotten my ass kicked by tiny badass women all day, give me 5 seconds, I grumbled in response. Ah, poor baby, Ruby said, the petite teen grinning at the scowl I gave her. Hey, Natasha clapped, getting out attention. Focus. May, can you go over where Ruby went wrong with her? May nodded, turning to Ruby. In the meantime, Mahmoud, you're fighting both of us now, Natasha said, hopping into the ring. This because I complained, isn't it? I asked in despair. If you have to ask. Natasha said in sing-song, moving in with Sky. Together, the two women started to punch me like I was filled with sand and not gooey, bruisable insides and crunchy bones. I tried my best to fight back, but even with Sky as the weak link, I was getting beat up bad. In the meantime, May spoke quietly with Ruby. For a brief moment, I could see the two talking, Ruby asking questions earnestly. Tough nut to crack, that one. She was confident, but in the way a lot of teens are. But also, she was like, well, an ex-23 who actually wanted to be a killer. Raised her whole life to be the ultimate badass. If Sky was slightly above me in skill as a human, and Natasha might as well have been the sun, then Ruby was smack dab in the middle. She was also an abrasive little brat. I focused on fighting once more, my breath heavy, and sweat pouring from me as bruises covered my body. Natasha added to them with a kick to my thigh that forced me to drop to a knee. Sky followed that by punching me in the chest, sending me to my back. I rolled up and kneed Sky in the stomach. When I followed by trying to punch Natasha, she easily slid around the blow, shoved my head to the side, then wrapped an arm around my neck and twisted me around to toss me into the ground, where I crashed with a loud slap of flesh on the mat. I lay there dazed, trying to understand just how much my ass had been kicked. Yeah, that's good enough, Natasha walked up to me, looking down. You getting better? That was a good flying knee, but you aren't defensive enough. I think fighting as invincible aliens so often has you used to being able to take a hit. Can you blame me? Diamond Head and Wrath can take a tank shell without a scratch. Well, maybe a small bruise in Wrath's case, but he'd be okay with that. I rolled up to my feet as I said that, thinking about Wrath. Yeah, he tended to see pain in combat as a reason to fight harder. Because Wrath was badass. You need to remember as a human you can't survive a real beating from a skilled opponent, Natasha said, helping me up. Thankfully you've at least got real experience in a fight. You can't beat anyone who really knows what they're doing, but you can at least fight off street thugs easily. With some more training, you'll get better. Also, this training will make fighting in your alien forms more effective. She turned to Sky. You're a little further along though. I can tell you've been trained by May and Ward. Sky flinched at that. Why yeah, he was my so. Before he turned out to be a traitor. Natasha nodded. Well, they trained you well. Now, I believe you guys have an appointment. Right. I struggled to my feet and walked out of the ring. See you in the lab, Sky. See you there, she said, heading to the women's locker room while I headed to the men's. Chapter 75, Snarrow and Daredevil. Web swinging. And yes, I knew I was using living bandages but this was a Marvel universe, so web swinging is the word I'll use. Had to be one of the most fun ways I'd ever used to travel in New York. Flying was fun, sure, but something about feeling gravity and momentum working together to send me past the buildings made me want to yell out for joy. I got the hang of it very quickly, going off my time playing Spider-Man and Batman video games to help. Of course, the fact I was Snarrow helped me even further. At any moment, I could simply turn into scraps of bandages and shoot forward before changing back into my humanoid form, giving me even more mobility through the city. At one point, when faced with a massive building ahead of me, I simply rolled onto the ground, turned into long lines of paper, and shot upwards. Once at the roof, I turned back to my humanoid form, launched 2 bandages that attached to a pipe on the roof, pulled myself forward, and shot back into the sky, the material of my body giving me a bit of drag as I fell through the sky towards the lights of the city. It was exhilarating, even more than flying. I mean, it was awesome to fly, but when I was doing it to get from point A to point B, it was more boring, since I was essentially just moving in a straight line. This was much more involved, like parkour on speed. Daredevil ran along buildings at a slightly slower pace, but not by much. He knew the city better than I did, even with all my patrolling, taking alleyways and shortcuts to match my pace. His new billy clubs helped, having been made to be as close as I could make them to the comics. I'd even included a variation on the goop formula so it could attach to walls without needing to wrap around anything. Heading over to the docks he'd indicated, we ended up near a warehouse. I landed on a water tower in a classic spy day pose, Daredevil landing at the foot of it as we gazed at the dock. A bunch of large shipping containers lay next to the warehouse, at the edge of the water leading to the harbor. A man in a chair was near the shipping containers, clearly waiting for someone. More men milled around the area. In the darkness though, only the fact I was looking for them let me see where they were. I thought about changing to Wild Mutt to try and sense if they were armed with guns, but I decided to leave that for later. After all, if I needed super senses, I could outsource rather than expend Omnitrix energy. What have we got? I asked, shifting my bright green eyes to look down at Daredevil. He stood still a moment, shifting his head from side to side and taking deep breaths. I imagined, like Wild Mutt, he was smelling and tasting the air, which, in New York City, was an extremely mixed bag. About 10 guys guarding the area. Only 3 are armed with guns. One is drunk, smells like he had tequila at the Mexican restaurant nearby. One of them, the guy near the door, he's jittery. He's an addict, jonesing for a hit. Everyone else is bored though like they have a long wait ahead. I think we have some time before the cargo, whatever it is, shows up. He cocked his head at me as I stared, dumbfounded. After a silence, he rubbed his chin. I'm not sure how you're reacting with this alien form. Is that enough to go on? Pretty sure it is, I said slowly. I stroked the mask bit where my chin would be, a raspy sound from my wraps rubbing together filling the air. Well, we need proof of wrongdoing. Can't just rush in and attack a bunch of guys on a dock. So we wait, Daredevil said, moving to sit on the edge of the building. I did the same. For a few minutes, we simply sat in awkward silence together. Finally, unable to handle it, I turned to look at him and said the first thing that came to mind. So, you, watch movies? Play video games, read, any of that? He chuckled, sounding surprised. Not as much as I wish I could. I'm usually too busy. Can't remember the last time I did any of that. Plus, not a lot of media for blind people, the last words teasing. Oh crap, don't tell me I forgot. I was just trying to make the time pass, and that's such a stereotypical conversation starter? Crap, I'm sorry man, I didn't dash. No, it's fine. I've, read a lot. Since I can read the raised ink, it's one of the only ways I can absorb media. I also like comic books. Really? I asked, surprised. Well, if the ink is distinct enough, I can feel it and get an image in my head. It's easier to read regular books though. Nowadays, comics are a bit fuzzier for me. You should try manga, I suggested. Their brushstrokes tend to be a lot more defined. So, what books have you read? A lot of the classics, Matt said. Lord of the Rings was good. I also liked Someone's Coming. In a smooth movement, Matt rose to his feet, while I shapeshifted myself to stand below us. A white van pulled onto the docks. Matt stiffened, and I looked over at him. What is it? Screams, he said in a soft voice. A dangerous voice. We need to get down there. He swung his billy club out and attached it to the nearest crane on the docks, swinging across as the van rolled towards where the man in the chair was sitting. I followed, my mind slowly realizing what was happening, but still not quite processing it. We landed on a shipping container as the white van rolled to a stop in front of an open container. As we watched, 2 guys got out, leaving the van's headlights on to illuminate the docks. A tall, thin, black man with a shaved head and groomed goatee walked up as the driver and passenger opened the back of the van. More men walked up, helping to drag the cargo out. 8 of them, female, young, pretty, with makeup ruined from crying. All of them were wearing some variation of low-skirted dress, and they were different in many ways, from skin tone to hair color, to body type. The clinical side of me noted all of this. The emotional part of me felt a cold chill in my wraps. I stared at the screaming and crying group of girls as they were dragged over to the open container, the men forcing them along uncaring. Okay, I said coldly, my ghoulish voice letting me whisper very easily. I'll start with the guys on the edge. Point them out for me, please. Matt pointed them out. I nodded. Got it. Keep your comm open. What is the plan? Matt whispered. I'll get rid of the guys around the area. You protect the girls from harm. Good. Good. Matt flourished his billy clubs. Down below, the tall black man was saying something about a bucket. He raised a baton and demonstrated the shock feature. When the girls panicked, he rolled his eyes and moved in to touch it against a girl. I forced myself to move at the same time Matt dropped down. I swung up using the crane, moving towards a section on top of shipping containers that were triple stacked. A guy was roaming back and forth on top of it. I turned into a bundle of bandages and dropped in front of him in that shape. He swore, stepping back in surprise, then blinking at the sight of me. I didn't give him time to wonder where I came from. Instead, I leaped upwards, wrapping around his mouth as he tried to shout. My other bandages squeezed tight to the rest of his body, pinning his arms and legs together, bones creaking under my grip as I wrapped around him. I made sure to wrap around his throat extra tight as my head rose up. He screamed once more when his eyes met mine, air leaving his lungs. I took pleasure in the sight of his face turning red, the tears and fear in his eyes. He struggled, and I growled in disgust before letting go and gagging him. I hung him up Batman, Arkham series style from a light post, leaving him wiggling with a silent scream against my bandages. 2. At the same time, Daredevil was giving the guys hell. He broke the nose of the tall black man, sending him flying. Another man tried to jump him from behind, so Matt backflipped over him before dropping down to slam his boots into his attacker's back as he dropped, the man screaming on the ground as Matt ground his feet into his back. Another man grabbed the shock baton off the floor where the tall man had dropped it, swinging it to hit Matt in the head. He grunted at the impact on his helmet, then spun around with his billy clubs to hit the guy, sending blood and teeth spraying from the thug's mouth. Damn. Matt looked scary. He flowed around in a dark blur, seeming to blend in the shadows. His horns somehow seemed massively prominent, and his hands and feet smashed into people with hatred I couldn't fathom. The guy seemed unstoppable. Natasha and Bucky, as ruthless as they were, felt businesslike in their combat. Matt was more like. His horns stood prominently on his helmet as his red eyes glowed in the flash of the lights. I left my own target on the top of the containers wrapped in bandages and jumped over to another guy. Random thug. He had no idea what was going. Today was supposed to be just another day on the job. Watch the docks in case of police, be ready for the shipment, watch it head out, then get paid. It was easy work as long you weren't arrested, certainly paid more than being a fast food worker. Now here he was, his gun out as he ran in between the shipping containers. Apparently, according to the radio, some guy in a costume was attacking. One guy and he was kicking their asses. He needed to get over there, he needed to. Something tall dropped down in front of him. He panicked, raising his gun at the tall figure in the darkness and shooting, hitting it in the chest several times. The figure froze. Then it walked forward. He fired again, his bullet hitting it where the figure's heart should have been, but it kept walking forward. Then, its arms seemed to open, at 3 lines around the forearms on both. They glowed a bright green. A sickly green. A pair of lights joined in where his head should have been. What the fuck? He said quietly in horror. What are you? In response, the figure seemed to stretch outward. Then it filled the alleyway. Oh my god, he screamed, shooting over and over again. Something that smelled like sand and cloth wrapped around him, throwing him to his left hard enough to break his arm. He screamed again. The last he saw before passing out was a pair of green eyes in the shadow, his scream drowned out in a sea of rough cloth choking him. Matt Murdock/Daredevil. Breathing hard, Matt threw a billy club, bouncing it off the pavement, then a shipping container, where it hit a man who had been reaching for one of the women, presumably to use as a hostage. The girls had huddled together as they watched, screaming and shaking with fear. Matt caught the billy club when it returned, ducked under a punch from a tall pale-skinned man with large muscles and came up in a backflip that smashed his boots into the man's chin, sending him back to the ground. Someone cocked a gun, drawing Matt's attention. He tossed his billy club at the tall black man on the ground, knocking the gun out of his hand, then flipped over to kick him in the face. He closed in on another man, sliding around a kick to close in. There was a terrifying brutality as Matt fought. As though all the anger and hatred a human could have suddenly moved through him, his hands twisting the man's arm to shatter his wrist, then fists flowing to break his nose. Matt growled a low inhuman sound that further scared the women watching, then twisted to throw the man against a shipping container with a brutal slap of pounds of flesh on metal. When the beaten man tried to struggle up again, the devil stomped on his head with just enough force to knock him out. 2 men, the last of those standing, rushed Matt at the same time. He stood his ground as they came, then slid around a kick to punch one of the men in the face. Suddenly, the 3 men were in a melee, dodging, blocking, and attacking in a fierce blaze of blows. Matt's senses sang, the sound of fists and feet slicing through the air, the smell of sweat, the feel of vibrations through the pavement, the taste of blood in the air and on his mouth, all working together to create a world of flames. He navigated through the fire, taking a few hits on his new armor. His new, and apparently very strong, armor. It still hurt a bit to be punched, but it was nothing compared to before when his heightened sense of touch seemed to scream with every blow. The fight ended in a single moment. Matt leaped up when one of the men tried to sweep his feet out from under him, twisting to kick his feet out in one direction while punching the other, savagely hitting both men in the head and sending them to the ground. He twisted in the air and threw a billy club in the head of the tall black man, who was reaching for his gun. As the hardened steel sent teeth flying and shattered bones, Matt smiled just a bit. With that, he walked over to finish him off. Mahmoud Sheikh/Dial. I tossed that guy aside wrapped in my bandages, then flew towards a man coming around the corner. I decided against any fancy tricks. When he pulled out a knife and stabbed me in the chest, I simply ignored the knife to tackle him into a brick wall behind him, then wrapped him up, letting him lay there wriggling as all 9 feet of me ran to the next guy. It was almost sad. One guy tried to punch me in the face, only to scream in horror when I opened up a mouth with fangs of cloth and devoured him, spitting him out in bandages with all his fingers in his hands broken. I would have felt sorry. But when I'd finished and rejoined Daredevil, He was finishing off the last of the guys, resting on the man's chest and punching him over and over in the face. I'd have stopped him if it wasn't for the fact I could see two things. The group of 8 women and the container they would have been transported in. I dropped down from the sky and landed, all 9 feet of mummy standing tall over the devil beating a man. Matt and I must have made a terrifying sight, me with my strange appearance and glowing green eyes, Matt's fists sending up blood to fall across his armor and bare mouth under the lights of the white van. One of the women screamed when I stepped forward. Thinking quickly, I tapped the Omnitrix, turning back into my human form in the armor I'd created. With a twist of my wrists, my helmet fell away, leaving me looking over at the group of women. Matt rose next to me, panting hard. "Ladies, please calm down," I told the group, feeling a little nervous. "I'm Dial, from the Avengers. This is Daredevil, one of the..." I thought fast, realizing he wasn't on a team. "Marvel Knights," Matt cocked his head at that. "We're heroes. We came to help." The women began to calm down after hearing that. I twisted my wrists, bringing my helmet back up and looking around as my comms called 911, recording the call as well as bringing X in on the conversation. "Daredevil," I said while the phone rang. "This was too organized," Matt agreed immediately. "Think we should ask some questions." "This ends," I said harshly, breathing the words out hard. "Human trafficking. Slavery." My eyes panned back to the shipping container, with 2 ratty mattresses and a single blanket resting inside, no food or water. I looked at the ground, where a single bucket rested innocently on the pavement. Then at the women, who even now were crying. I felt an impulse then, to turn into one of my brute aliens and smash the dock apart until I could forget what had been happening in my city. Sex slavery. No, not anymore. As the phone rang, I looked back at Daredevil, who was clenching his billy clubs tightly. "Going to be a late one. You okay with that?" Matt smiled a slow and vicious smile. Yes, I am." "Good. Because we need answers, right on cue." One of the men Matt had beaten up groaned in pain. We looked over at him lying on the ground. He looked at us. I'm not sure what he thought of us. Me in my strange plated helmet and Matt dressed like the devil while covered in blood. But he shuddered in fear, twisting on his stomach and trying to pull away. I had just the alien for this. With a twist of the dial, I brought up my chosen alien. "X, can you let the police know what is going on?" "Of course," the southern accent of my favorite AI said, sounding a bit distracted, but willing. Looking over at my current partner, I played further with the Omnitrix, just out of habit. "Daredevil, can you ask him questions?" "I won't be able to talk." Matt blinked. "Then what will you be doing?" I walked toward the man whimpering as he scrambled at the pavement, pulling himself away from me while I pushed down on the Omnitrix. "I'm playing bad dog." "Don't you mean bad?" "Oh," Matt said as the green flash ended, nose flaring. He shrugged, walking over to join me. The man on the floor, with his tanned skin and leather jacket, looked up at me as his nose poured blood. His eyes widened, and he screamed. I snarled at the noise, leaning in towards him. He surprised me by struggling quickly to his feet and taking 3 running steps. Curious as to how far he'd go, I began to chase him, roaring. My claws tore through the pavement to shoot me after him. He screamed in horror, reaching the van and getting in. I jumped at the hood of the van, landing on it hard, and aiming my eyeless face at him as my drool poured down long fangs while I growled loudly, dripping against the windshield, his sweet fear scent filling my scent glands. He shrieked, scratching at his jacket, tears in his eyes. The animal in me reveled in the presence of prey. The human in me smiled at the knowledge of a scared monster. Because what else do you call a sex slaver? He finally got his keys out, reaching to put them in the ignition. I put my paw against the glass. Slowly, I pressed against the windshield. He let out a wordless scream when cracks started to blossom beneath my paw. I smiled, fangs flashing. Daredevil walked slowly up, and I could hear the low chuckle he made as the thug in the van screamed. The man finally got the key in the ignition, hands twitching and turning on the engine. In a quick move, I slammed my other paw through the hood and ripped into the engine of the van, my claws treating steel like papier-mâché. The smell of oil and the sound of an engine dying filled the air as I dug around in the car, then ripped it out of the hood, presenting over 300 pounds of metal in one paw to him as I smiled at my prey. Please put that back." The crying thug whimpered. My many fangs flashed as I tossed it aside. He broke down then, screaming and crying at the same time. 1. The windshield broke under my paw, and he lost it, going into the fetal position in the driver's seat as I leaned in, taking deep whiffs of his exquisite fear. "God, you haven't lived until you found out how good a scared person you're hunting smells." I barked loudly, getting another whimper, the man's snot dripping down his upper lip from his nose. Then someone knocked on the window. The man looked over at Daredevil, who gave him a wide grin. "You know, I can end this. Just answer some questions and, well, I might tell him not to eat you." I snarled, trying to convey disappointment, leaning forward and licking the man's face. Oddly not as gross or off-putting to my current mind as the action would likely be if I was human. "Oh God, please, just get it away from me." "Oh, believe me, I want to." Seeing him eat is not pleasant. I bit the guy's hair and tugged hard, Daredevil knocking on the glass as though admonishing me for it. The guy screamed and sobbed, trying to push me away while also trying not to touch me. "Pal, look at me," Daredevil said, sounding both chipper and threatening all at once. He switched up, taking on a smooth and calm tone. The devil offering a deal to the desperate and dying. "You can get out of this. All you have to do is talk to me. You have a chance. What's your name? When he didn't speak, just kept sobbing, I slashed outwards, ripping his shirt off, then pressed my paw to his chest. For just a moment, I hesitated. Then I thought of what would have happened to those women, and pushed down my humanity, dipping into the animal I was borrowing. My claws dug slowly into his chest, blood beginning to be drawn. Brian? My name is Brian Roberts. Brian. Okay, Brian. You have a chance here. Answer my questions, and we'll let you go. It's an easy choice, Brian. Aren't those nice? Say yes, and you get a great prize. Say no, and you get something else. Claws tore just a bit, followed by whimpers. What do you say? Why yes. I backed away from Brian, who sobbed with relief, reaching to pull his jacket over the claw marks in his chest. My scent glands flared at the scent of blood. Good. Now, what do you know about your bosses and their business? And don't lie, believe me when I say. Daredevil leaned in close and his eyes glowed red, from inbuilt armor systems, as his voice grew deadly serious. I'll know. Chapter 76, Snarrow and Daredevil, Part 2. When the police got to the docks, Matt and I watched from on top of a crane overlooking it. I eyed the cops as they surrounded the area, putting away the men we'd knocked out. Wearing my new stealth armor, I blinked in a brief pattern that activated the zoom and enhance cliché tech, letting me watch a group of cops blinking at the sight of a pair of men tied up in Snarrow bandages. Another couple of guys were being cared for by EMTs. The women we'd saved were helped into cars. One of them looked up briefly, where she must have seen Matt and I rappel towards, gave us a hesitant wave, then got into the police car. The guy we were interrogating was shivering as he was taken away, his shirt still ripped. He kept mumbling to himself and the officers taking him, looking shell-shocked. As the police gathered their quarry, I looked at Matt. Okay, what is he saying? Matt cocked his head to point his right ear toward the guy. Something about Satan and his hellhound. Matt shook his head. I think he's getting better, but we scared him. Don't worry though, his heartbeat is calming down. Not that he deserves it. 1. I shook my head, feeling a bit disquieted. Sure, we had only skirted a line, not crossed it. And it had been for damn sure justified. There were more girls in the city, being made, created, produced, whatever fucking thing you could call it. The Russians were behind it. 1. My feelings about sex workers are complicated. On the one hand, if a man or woman truly wants to do such a thing, I think it's their right to. They should be allowed to have control over their bodies, as long as they don't hurt innocent people or force their views onto others. I also believe they should be as protected as any other citizen. The fact that they are seen as easy targets, people you can belittle and abuse without consequence, is a travesty. But worse is when they are forced into it. I won't get into it. I won't describe the horrific things that need to be done to control a person without the brainwashing tech that Hydra used. Well, compared to the Russians, Hydra might as well have been kind. Though I didn't doubt that they had used such methods themselves before more efficient ways were developed. I clenched and unclenched my fists, slowly. Yeah, I was pissed. Okay then. We have a plan. I asked Daredevil. I thought you would have one, he said, surprising me. You've been a, well, superhero for a while, right? Yeah, but I learned everything about it from comic books before I ended up fighting alongside the Avengers, I admitted. Still, his comment had me thinking on that. The Russians were apparently behind the human slave trade now. The guy we'd interrogated had no idea how that happened since he was just a low-level guy, but he knew the basics. The Russians, Chinese, Yakuza, even some of the old mobsters, had taken over Hell's Kitchen. Right here, right now, we know of one building where people are in danger, I said at last. Agreed. Matt rose to his feet, facing me as we balanced on the crane above the docks, both in our dark armor. We go in and save them. And at the same time, we send the report of what happened to my people, I said grimly. They'll know what to do with the information we find. X. Yes, sir, X said quietly. I might need you again. Is that okay? This is the darker part of human nature. Jarvis and I have been working on the dark web together for some time, confronting those using it for the purpose of harming the innocent. I will have no issues aiding you, he said, sounding positively vicious. Humanity has its monsters, sir. I have no issue helping the devil to punish them. I blinked at that, surprised. You've been. Under the direction of Maria Hill, we have saved hundreds of young children, women, and men. There has been some issues, but I am proud of the work we have done. Holy, so that's what she wanted to borrow him for. Sometimes it was easy to forget that I didn't always have a direct view of the heroism happening in the world around me. X, you are a freaking gift I never expected, I said, surprised as hell. Seriously, anything you want after this, it's yours. I will remember that, X said simply. 3. In the meantime, we need directions. Time to. I stopped. I couldn't think of something pithy to say. I thought of saying one of Ben's quotes, but, no, not tonight. Instead, I took a deep breath. Show us the target, X. Daredevil said nothing as his helmet, rather than showing the GPS route I was getting on my own HUD, simply booted up the program I'd created to aid him with sightless navigation. Once the route was made, and I'd changed into Snarrow again, we were off. And as we went, I steeled myself. I knew what we would find there. I knew it might be even worse than that. There had been some rough moments for me before. I still checked up on the one woman I hadn't been able to save before she was raped, instead beating her attackers more viciously than I ever had up to that point. I had to keep a clear head. I had to save innocence, but also not, God help me. Allah, all I want to do now is rip and tear all of these evil bastards. And being Snarrow wasn't helping. Because if any form knows the meaning of undying anger, of course, it would be one of the aliens from the inner system. 3. Daredevil and I swung silently into the city as I tried to keep my spirits up. The building Daredevil and I ended up at was apparently an apartment building once, all square and brick, with 4 floors. It was now owned by the Russians, set up to prepare people for the sex trafficking business. Basically, give the people they selected a certain drug, force them to get addicted, then condition through the drugs, beatings, and sexual abuse to become their product. Guards stood casually around the building, just 4 guys, one at the front door, one circling around, and 2 guys smoking on the roof. Daredevil and I stood on across from the building in a nearby park that had seen better days, with a playground that was missing half the equipment and had a bunch of trash littering it. Funny, because we'd passed somewhere that had a beautiful park nearby, all clean and updated equipment for kids. New York City, a city of lights and shadows. Wouldn't want to live anywhere else. How should we do this? I said quietly. You want me to take the guys at the door, while you head in from the roof? Maybe. He cocked his head from side to side, listening. About 20 people inside monitoring their prisoners. How did they stay hidden for so long? I've been wondering the same, so I did some digging, X said. I've looked over the officers who patrol this part of this city. According to traffic reports, they seem to avoid this street. A look at their financials shows some very creative bookkeeping hiding the fact that they have been obtaining more money than their salary would allow for. Bribes, Daredevil said. Makes sense. Any chance you have an alien that can shut the doors? Close the exits to keep them from opening, or at least one that can cover them with some boards, he said uncertainly, apparently unsure of the idea of asking that. More than a few, I replied, looking over at the blind badass. What are you thinking? As you said, you come from the bottom, I go down from the top. We keep the prisoners safe by being as stealthy as we can. If we can take them out without getting caught, we can have the police over to clean up after. X, was it? Yes, Mr. Murdoch. Any chance you can make sure those called aren't dirty? Bridge has a list I can consult. Good. One officer by the name of Brett is worth a look. Matt looked at me. Ready. Eager, I admitted, lifting my hand up and pressing on the Omnitrix. Let's go. My first target was the guy roaming in circles around the building. I floated over him on waves of anti-gravity in goop form, waiting for my chance. He was leaving the guy at the front door, just turning the corner. Almost. The second he was alone, I dropped on top of him as a ball of goo taller than him. He tried to shout, but I wrapped a green jello hand around his mouth. Goop, as a gelatinous being, had a bunch of neat tricks beyond just shapeshifting. For one thing, my anti-gravity projector gave me some form of flight. For another, I could change the goo that made up my form to become all sorts of things. With a thought, I shifted my body chemistry to become adhesive, leaving his mouth shut by the sticky fluid. With a throw, he slammed into the brick wall, where I fired another ball of goo, leaving him struggling in fear attached to the wall by a sticky green web. Floating up again, I moved to the guy at the door at high speed. He was smoking a cigarette when I showed up. I spun around in midair and fired pieces of myself, the balls of green hitting his face and chest to lift him up and slam him into the stair covered in my adhesive goo before he could say a word. I took some time to wipe away enough from his nose so he could breathe comfortably. I moved up to the door and slinked over to it. Eyeing it for a moment, I came up with an idea. Leaning down, I pressed my arm against the bottom of the door. My left arm shrank, flowed, and finally slipped under the door. Goop's eye moved over to that section, letting me look around. 2 guys were in the living room, drinking while an old Godzilla movie played. Another guy was in the kitchen, making himself a snack I suppose. I watched a moment longer through my left arm while my other eye kept an eye out. Once I was sure I could move, I changed my body composition to acidic. The wood on the door dissolved around my arm, making a hole big enough for my anti-gravity projector to go into the house, with the rest of me coming inside. Slipping into the kitchen as a stream of green fluid moving along the floor, I moved behind the guy making a snack. It was a sandwich. I waited for the short Russian man to raise the sandwich to his mouth, taking a bite. The second it was in his mouth, I rose off the floor and surrounded him in tight bonds of green goo rope. He choked on his sandwich, but I slammed a piece of adhesive on his mouth, leaving him unable to yell. He struggled as more bonds wrapped around his wrists, then I lifted him to the ceiling before attaching him there, leaving him looking down at me as he struggled against the green adhesive keeping him against the ceiling. Not a sound was made. I moved to the living room, flowing across the floor while keeping an eye out for more bad guys. Slipping behind the couch where the 2 guys were watching TV, I slowly seeped underneath the couch. Anyone who has owned a couch knows there is a lot of space under the things. In this case, I was able to rise up through the couch, slipping along the wooden frame and nails, filling every nook and cranny. I took a moment to make sure no one was coming. Then I struck right as Godzilla roared on the screen. To the Russians on the chair, it must have seemed like the couch was suddenly eating them. I swam around them, soaking them, pieces of myself surround their mouths as they screamed. It felt funny when their screams created bubbles within me. I pulled them tight to the couch, grabbing one guy's arms when he struggled to reach for a gun and pulling it into his arm. It was a bit of struggle, controlling the movements of 2 guys at once, like typing with one hand and eating with the other, but I managed to get them stuck to the couch. A bit more adhesive made sure the couch was stuck to the floor so they couldn't tip it over and draw attention. I moved to the door and fired a big glop that covered the entire door. After doing the same to the back door, I moved upstairs, floating up as a flowing river. 1. A guy rested on a chair with a magazine, reading to himself when I got to the next floor. I ignored him for now, sliding along the ceiling and heading to one of the rooms. Inside, I found my worst fears. A young woman and man with a bed each, both handcuffed to the metal beds so their arms and legs were spread. They were passed out and half naked, track marks on their arms. For a moment, I fiercely missed fighting Hydra, as opposed to dealing with the horrors I was seeing. I pushed away that thought and tried to decide what to do. I couldn't free them, not yet. For all I knew, they were already broken, Stockholm Syndrome and conditioning doing their work. If I tried to help, they might see me as an enemy. With a heavy heart, I flowed back out of the room and attacked the guy in the hall, attaching him to the ceiling with more force than necessary. Each room I visited was a small nightmare. I flowed through the building, taking my time, making sure to mark every victim. Some of them were so young. The casual abuse they'd suffered. There were 10 people on that floor, and I forced myself to remember everyone for the police report later. On the 3rd floor, I met some trouble. A group of 6 rough-looking men sitting around a crap television, joking around and playing card games. I couldn't attack them all at once. I mean, I could, but not without getting in a fight. I quickly counted up the guys I'd taken out. 2 outside, 3 on the 1st floor, 1 on the 2nd, the 6 in front of me. That made 12. Matt had said there were 20 people, not counting the prisoners. Maybe, if I separated them out a bit, then took them out fast, firing quick. Thinking, I decided to use my skills learned from stealth games. Carefully, I aimed down at the stairs and fired a big blob of goo. It splattered noisily on the stairs. The 6 guys looked up curiously. What was that? One man asked in Russian, the Omnitrix translating for me. Probably one of the girls shitting themselves again. Another answered with a grumble. James, check it out. Oh, come on. James, apparently, shouted in annoyance. Those bitches can wait for a bit, let's finish this hand. Would you go already? One of the older guys said. He grumbled, rising up and slapping his cards down. As he walked away, he turned to the others. Hey, no cheating. Go, 3 of the men shouted. Grumbling again, he walked away. As he did, one of the men quickly picked up James' cards and smirked at what he saw, grinning at the others as he put them back down. James, still complaining, went down the stairs with me following above him. He stopped when he saw the spot on the steps where my ball of goo had landed, soaking the carpet. What the hell? James mumbled to himself. I fired a stream of goo with the pressure of a fire hose. He had time to yell before the stream slammed him into the stairs railing. That hell was that? James. I cursed mentally. I'd gotten impatient, made a mistake. Nothing to do but move forward. Flowing upward, I got ready for the next stage, and hoped I hadn't ruined anything for Matt. Comment. 4 comments. Chapter 77, Rescue. Tony Stark/Iron Man. Tony and Pepper entered the ballroom to a roar of applause. Ever the showman, Tony waved at the crowd of rich folk and journalists, smirking cockily as some cameras flashed. Tony wore a pristine gray suit, with a silk green shirt underneath, while Pepper was wearing a sleek black dress that really did incredible things to her legs. What am I spending my money on again? Tony mumbled to Pepper, who had an arm in his as she guided him through the room. It's a fundraiser to help schools on the East Coast, Pepper whispered to him, nodding graciously to the crowd. We're donating equipment, helping with school programs, that sort of thing. Why would I help a bunch of nerds? Tony asked with an honest smile. You love nerds. I love the nerds I actually know. The billionaire smiled a bit wider. But no, it's great. I wish you told me sooner. Am I giving them enough money? I want to make sure it's a lot. Between you and Mahmoud, I think a lot of good will be done. It's not perfect, of course, Pepper admitted, taking a glass of champagne as a waiter passed and the pair walked up to a podium at the end of their walk. Fanboys paying for this too. Tony blinked. Oh yeah, he's rich. I should get him something. He's rich, so you need to get him more stuff. Pepper asked. Rich people get free things, everyone knows that. At least, all the random crap people keep sending me says so. Pepper sighed in annoyance as they finally reached the podium, Tony getting behind it to speak. Okay, calm down so I can get a word in, he said, the audience laughing on command. Tony hid a scowl. Always annoying how pandering some people can get. Of course, Tony also didn't like when people ignored or got mad at him, but at least they had the respect to be honest with him, rather than kissing his ass. All right, we all know why we're here. To give money to schools, then drink wine and eat expensive foods to make sure we keep wineries and caterers in business. Which is kind of a fundraiser on top of a fundraiser, so congrats to us. Everyone cheered. So, get plastered, eat a lot, and pay out the butt to keep the next guy as smart as me in school? Cheers. As everyone clapped, Tony looked at Pepper, grinning. Pretty good, right? She gave him a look that was typical Pepper, a combination of fond and exasperated. Good, except that you weren't supposed to give a speech. That guy was. Huh. Yeah, that older balding guy looked surprised as hell. I probably did a better job anyway. Tony took her by the arm. Come on, let's dance. You're incorrigible, Pepper chuckled, letting herself be pulled away. Hey, I'm irresistible, Tony smirked. Well, 12% or so, Pepper smirked at the stunned look on Tony's face. Maybe a little more, depending on how things go. Sheesh, you'd think you'd let that go, Tony grumbled. Only a little, she giggled, almost shaking with laughter. About 12%. The pair grinned at each other, dancing across the ballroom as one. For a moment, Tony felt at peace. He had his girl, good food, and some crap drinks, while the terrible classic music played. Pepper was smiling at him, guiding him more than he was guiding her. Thank God she was a good dancer. She pulled him in for a kiss, and he let her do it, pressing close. They held for a moment. Mr. Stark. And then someone had to goddamn ruin it. Holding back the urge to call in a suit and rain repulsors on the interrupting speaker, Tony pulled away and sighed slightly, annoyed. Pepper chuckled, then the two looked at the speaker. A blonde woman stood there. She was kinda pretty, short, and looking way smug. Huh. This chick. I'm sorry, can I help you, miss? Tony trailed off, looking confused. The smug look on her face fell away, Pepper coughing back a delicate laugh. She recovered, badly, and held out a hand with a fake smile. Christine Everhart, WHH World News. Oh, I get it, you want a job, Tony said quickly. I get it, working for those hacks. Tell you what, Pepper could use a new assistant since her best one turned out to be Avenger material. I'd rather not, Pepper smiled. Natasha was too good to be replaced by anyone subpar. Christine's smile shattered, turning into a scowl. She dropped her hand, which Tony had pointedly not taken. I wanted to ask you about recent reports that you've been patrolling New York City. Don't you think this show of vigilante justice may cause issues? If you start attacking people in the street, with none of the training or oversight that police officers have dash. How about this? I'll promise not to attack anyone who isn't stealing, attacking, or messing with people. Oh, or shooting at me, that's important, Tony snarked. And you aren't worried about taking jobs from good police officers? Christine asked, narrowing her eyes. Not the good ones, no, Tony smirked. Trust me, there is plenty of crime in the world to keep me busy. I just throw out a helping hand when I can. Yes, you do, but what about your latest partner? She smiled viciously as if she'd nailed him. Which technically, was the opposite of the truth in so many ways. Tony mentally high-fived himself. He cocked an eyebrow at Christine, not noticing how Pepper had stiffened. What, Dial? He's solid. Kid's got some mad skills. I don't disagree, though her tone said otherwise. I'm talking about the new female in armor who has been following you both around on patrols. A lot of our viewers are wondering who she is, what her purpose on your patrols are since it doesn't seem to be fighting crime. Tony narrowed his eyes. Rescue isn't a superhero. Ironic name, considering she hasn't rescued anyone yet, Christine pointed out. So you just gave your armor, one of the most powerful weapons on Earth, to a woman for what, exactly? So you could have some cheering you on from the sidelines? Christine asked. She looked over at Pepper, her smile vicious as the redhead eyed her back. Any thoughts from you on the new woman in Tony's life? Or did you already know about her? His woman on the side. Tony felt his blood rush through his veins. From the look on Christine's face, she realized she'd reached too far when she saw the look on her face. Tony, even before he'd become Iron Man, had a reputation for being dangerous. He didn't waste his time on idiots, but mess with what was his, and suddenly the full force of Stark Industries, a company more powerful than most nations on the planet, was pressing down with an army of lawyers and a mountain of cash. Now that he was Iron Man, well, the Stark heir leaned in but stopped when Pepper moved in front of him. Actually, Christine, if you'd like, you can speak with me about that. Oh, Christine sounded amused. Can you tell me anything about her? I can even arrange an interview, if you'd like, Pepper said calmly. Sounds interesting. Who exactly is she, by the way? Me. Tony felt like kissing Pepper when he noted the gobsmacked look on Christine's face. Pepper smirked. So, when did you want to interview me? You're the one. Christine couldn't have sounded more surprised. Yes, I am, Pepper smiled. So, when should we have the interview? After discussing things, Christine left, and Pepper turned to her boyfriend. What's your plan? Tony asked. I need to get ahead of this, Pepper frowned. I can't let her control the narrative. I need to confront this. You don't need to do anything, Tony reminded her, scowling. Seriously, just ignore whatever people are saying. I can't, Pepper shook her head. I mean, I don't care about them. The interview is mostly for the company, to make sure we don't have idiots trying to discredit you with something. Everhart and her station is nothing. We can just buy them if we want to really shut them up, or force them to say nothing but good things about us, she smirked. Kidding of course. You sure? I mean, everything I ever learned about journalistic ethics, I learned from Citizen Kane, Tony snarked, getting a chuckle in response. No, Tony, Pepper guided him to the side, looking around. The problem is, I really want to do more, with the rescue armor. Maybe not your avenging stuff, but protect people. Not because I'm being pressured or anything. But when I think about it, about helping people, I don't know, she laughed. Is it weird? I haven't even had the suit for that long and I already want to fight crime in it. Not to do the superhero thing, not to hunt down bad guys, but if I see someone in trouble, I want to help them. Is that weird? Maybe. Might want to talk to someone less, well, me about that, Tony admitted. I'm the guy who used his first real suit to fight terrorists without telling anyone, remember? I'm kind of the worst guy to talk to about responsible armor usage. Yeah, I'll talk to Rhodey. Pepper pulled Tony to the center of the room, and the pair began to dance. Seriously, what do you think? I think you should do it, and I also think you shouldn't, he said, surprising Pepper. I'll support you. But from the second you brought that up, I've been thinking of 1,000 different ways to try and upgrade the armor to keep you safe, with my number one being to take it away so you can't get in danger in it. Tony. I still have nightmares, Tony shrugged as best as he could, trying to seem relaxed. About Killian taking you. About you standing next to an exploding hammer drone, or when Stana was chasing after you. He took a deep breath. I put you in danger, so many times. And now you're telling me you want to put yourself in and I just... He scowled, only to soften when Pepper pressed her palm to his cheek. Gently, she pulled his face to look into her eyes. I feel that way all the time. Ever since I saw you in that suit for the first time, covered in bullets. And after Loki, and aliens, seeing how much more dangerous the universe is. Something in Pepper seemed to crystallize, strengthen. I was so scared. But now, I can do something about it. I mean, I'm not asking to join the team or anything, but... Dial made my suit for a reason. And I think, in some way, he saw that I would need it. If not now, then later. So, you have a war machine. Can you accept a rescue, now and then? He grinned. God, that is so corny. Steve teach you that. He's classy like that. Pepper gave him an honest look. I want to do this. Not tomorrow or anything, I just want to think it over for now. But it feels like it's something for later. I don't know, it feels right. The light in her eyes seemed stronger. She suddenly seemed so giant now, as though she'd grown in the middle of the speech. Tony clutched Pepper close, sighing. I love you. God help me, I don't deserve you. You do, Pepper said, smiling up at him while pecking his lips. God, I don't know if I should though. She seemed to shrink into herself. It's easy to talk about, but actually doing it. I need time, first. Take all the time you need, Tony tried not to sound relieved. I'll talk to Dial and Fitz, get Jarvis to work some sort of plan. Hell, I'll hire every martial artist in the city to train you if you want. Just, is it wrong that I'm hoping you change your mind? Pepper shook her head. I've spent a lot of nights hoping that you would finally put away your suits. I don't blame you. Sorry, Tony winced. So this is what it feels like, huh? Sheesh, I really am an asshole. You have your moments. Chapter 76, Snarrow and Daredevil, Part 2. When the police got to the docks, Matt and I watched from on top of a crane overlooking it. I eyed the cops as they surrounded the area, putting away the men we'd knocked out. Wearing my new stealth armor, I blinked in a brief pattern that activated the zoom and enhance cliché tech, letting me watch a group of cops blinking at the sight of a pair of men tied up in Snarrow bandages. Another couple of guys were being cared for by EMTs. The women we'd saved were helped into cars. One of them looked up briefly, where she must have seen Matt and I rappel towards, gave us a hesitant wave, then got into the police car. The guy we were interrogating was shivering as he was taken away, his shirt still ripped. He kept mumbling to himself and the officers taking him, looking shell-shocked. As the police gathered their quarry, I looked at Matt. Okay, what is he saying? Matt cocked his head to point his right ear toward the guy. Something about Satan and his hellhound. Matt shook his head. I think he's getting better, but we scared him. Don't worry though, his heartbeat is calming down. Not that he deserves it. 1. I shook my head, feeling a bit disquieted. Sure, we had only skirted a line, not crossed it. And it had been for damn sure justified. There were more girls in the city. Being made, created, produced, whatever fucking thing you could call it. The Russians were behind it. 1. My feelings about sex workers are complicated. On the one hand, if a man or woman truly wants to do such a thing, I think it's their right to. They should be allowed to have control over their bodies, as long as they don't hurt innocent people or force their views onto others. I also believe they should be as protected as any other citizen. The fact that they are seen as easy targets, people you can belittle and abuse without consequence is a travesty. But worse is when they are forced into it. I won't get into it. I won't describe the horrific things that need to be done to control a person without the brainwashing tech that Hydra used. Well, compared to the Russians, Hydra might as well have been kind. Though I didn't doubt that they had used such methods themselves before more efficient ways were developed. I clenched and unclenched my fists, slowly. Yeah, I was pissed. Okay then. We have a plan. I asked Daredevil. I thought you would have one, he said, surprising me. You've been a, well, superhero for a while, right? Yeah, but I learned everything about it from comic books before I ended up fighting alongside the Avengers, I admitted. Still, his comment had me thinking on that. The Russians were apparently behind the human slave trade now. The guy we'd interrogated had no idea how that happened since he was just a low-level guy, but he knew the basics. The Russians, Chinese, Yakuza, even some of the old mobsters, had taken over Hell's Kitchen. Right here, right now, we know of one building where people are in danger, I said at last. Agreed. Matt rose to his feet, facing me as we balanced on the crane above the docks, both in our dark armor. We go in and save them. And at the same time, we send the report of what happened to my people, I said grimly. They'll know what to do with the information we find. X. Yes, sir, X said quietly. I might need you again. Is that okay? This is the darker part of human nature. Jarvis and I have been working on the dark web together for some time, confronting those using it for the purpose of harming the innocent. I will have no issues aiding you, he said, sounding positively vicious. Humanity has its monsters, sir. I have no issue helping the devil to punish them. I blinked at that, surprised. You've been. Under the direction of Maria Hill, we have saved hundreds of young children, women, and men. There has been some issues, but I am proud of the work we have done. Holy, so that's what she wanted to borrow him for. Sometimes it was easy to forget that I didn't always have a direct view of the heroism happening in the world around me. X, you are a freaking gift I never expected, I said, surprised as hell. Seriously, anything you want after this, it's yours. I will remember that, X said simply. 3. In the meantime, we need directions. Time to. I stopped. I couldn't think of something pithy to say. I thought of saying one of Ben's quotes, but, no, not tonight. Instead, I took a deep breath. Show us the target, X. Daredevil said nothing as his helmet, rather than showing the GPS route I was getting on my own HUD, simply booted up the program I'd created to aid him with sightless navigation. Once the route was made, and I'd changed into Snarrow again, we were off. And as we went, I steeled myself. I knew what we would find there. I knew it might be even worse than that. There had been some rough moments for me before. I still checked up on the one woman I hadn't been able to save before she was raped, instead beating her attackers more viciously than I ever had up to that point. I had to keep a clear head. I had to save innocents, but also not, God help me. Allah, all I want to do now is rip and tear all of these evil bastards. And being Snarrow wasn't helping. Because if any form knows the meaning of undying anger, of course, it would be one of the aliens from the inner system. 3. Daredevil and I swung silently into the city as I tried to keep my spirits up. The building Daredevil and I ended up at was apparently an apartment building once, all square and brick, with 4 floors. It was now owned by the Russians, set up to prepare people for the sex trafficking business. Basically, give the people they selected a certain drug, force them to get addicted, then condition through the drugs, beatings, and sexual abuse to become their product. Guards stood casually around the building, just 4 guys, 1 at the front door, 1 circling around, and 2 guys smoking on the roof. Daredevil and I stood on across from the building in a nearby park that had seen better days, with a playground that was missing half the equipment and had a bunch of trash littering it. Funny, because we'd passed somewhere that had a beautiful park nearby, all clean and updated equipment for kids. New York City, a city of lights and shadows. Wouldn't want to live anywhere else. How should we do this? I said quietly. You want me to take the guys at the door, while you head in from the roof? Maybe. He cocked his head from side to side, listening. About 20 people inside monitoring their prisoners. How did they stay hidden for so long? I've been wondering the same, so I did some digging, X said. I've looked over the officers who patrolled this part of the city. According to traffic reports, they seem to avoid this street. A look at their financials shows some very creative bookkeeping hiding the fact that they have been obtaining more money than their salary would allow for. Bribes, Daredevil said. Makes sense. Any chance you have an alien that can shut the doors? Close the exits to keep them from opening, or at least one that can cover them with some boards, he said uncertainly, apparently unsure of the idea of asking that. More than a few, I replied, looking over at the blind badass. What are you thinking? As you said, you come from the bottom, I go down from the top. We keep the prisoners safe by being as stealthy as we can. If we can take them out without getting caught, we can have the police over to clean up after. X, was it? Yes, Mr. Murdoch. Any chance you can make sure those called aren't dirty? Bridge has a list I can consult. Good. One officer by the name of Brett is worth a look. Matt looked at me. Ready. Eager, I admitted, lifting my hand up and pressing on the Omnitrix. Let's go. My first target was the guy roaming in circles around the building. I floated over him on waves of anti-gravity in goop form, waiting for my chance. He was leaving the guy at the front door, just turning the corner. Almost. The second he was alone, I dropped on top of him as a ball of goo taller than him. He tried to shout, but I wrapped a green jello hand around his mouth. Goop, as a gelatinous being, had a bunch of neat tricks beyond just shapeshifting. For one thing, my anti-gravity projector gave me some form of flight. For another, I could change the goo that made up my form to become all sorts of things. With a thought, I shifted my body chemistry to become adhesive, leaving his mouth shut by the sticky fluid. With a throw, he slammed into the brick wall, where I fired another ball of goo, leaving him struggling in fear attached to the wall by a sticky green web. Floating up again, I moved to the guy at the door at high speed. He was smoking a cigarette when I showed up. I spun around in midair and fired pieces of myself, the balls of green hitting his face and chest to lift him up and slam him into the stair covered in my adhesive goo before he could say a word. I took some time to wipe away enough from his nose so he could breathe comfortably. I moved up to the door and slinked over to it. Eyeing it for a moment, I came up with an idea. Leaning down, I pressed my arm against the bottom of the door. My left arm shrank, flowed, and finally slipped under the door. Goop's eye moved over to that section, letting me look around. 2 guys were in the living room, drinking while an old Godzilla movie played. Another guy was in the kitchen, making himself a snack I suppose. I watched a moment longer through my left arm while my other eye kept an eye out. Once I was sure I could move, I changed my body composition to acidic. The wood on the door dissolved around my arm, making a hole big enough for my anti-gravity projector to go into the house, with the rest of me coming inside. Slipping into the kitchen as a stream of green fluid moving along the floor, I moved behind the guy making a snack. It was a sandwich. I waited for the short Russian man to raise the sandwich to his mouth, taking a bite. The second it was in his mouth, I rose off the floor and surrounded him in tight bonds of green goo rope. He choked on his sandwich, but I slammed a piece of adhesive on his mouth, leaving him unable to yell. He struggled as more bonds wrapped around his wrists, then I lifted him to the ceiling before attaching him there, leaving him looking down at me as he struggled against the green adhesive keeping him against the ceiling. Not a sound was made. I moved to the living room, flowing across the floor while keeping an eye out for more bad guys. Slipping behind the couch where the two guys were watching TV, I slowly seeped underneath the couch. Anyone who has owned a couch knows there is a lot of space under the things. In this case, I was able to rise up through the couch, slipping along the wooden frame and nails, filling every nook and cranny. I took a moment to make sure no one was coming. Then I struck right as Godzilla roared on the screen. To the Russians on the chair, it must have seemed like the couch was suddenly eating them. I swam around them, soaking them, pieces of myself surround their mouths as they screamed. It felt funny when their screams created bubbles within me. I pulled them tight to the couch, grabbing one guy's arms when he struggled to reach for a gun and pulling it into his arm. It was a bit of struggle, controlling the movements of two guys at once, like typing with one hand and eating with the other, but I managed to get them stuck to the couch. A bit more adhesive made sure the couch was stuck to the floor so they couldn't tip it over and draw attention. I moved to the door and fired a big glop that covered the entire door. After doing the same to the back door, I moved upstairs, floating up as a flowing river. 1. A guy rested on a chair with a magazine, reading to himself when I got to the next floor. I ignored him for now, sliding along the ceiling and heading to one of the rooms. Inside, I found my worst fears. A young woman and man with a bed each, both handcuffed to the metal beds so their arms and legs were spread. They were passed out and half naked, track marks on their arms. For a moment, I fiercely missed fighting Hydra, as opposed to dealing with the horrors I was seeing. I pushed away that thought and tried to decide what to do. I couldn't free them, not yet. For all I knew, they were already broken, Stockholm Syndrome and conditioning doing their work. If I tried to help, they might see me as an enemy. With a heavy heart, I flowed back out of the room and attacked the guy in the hall, attaching him to the ceiling with more force than necessary. Each room I visited was a small nightmare. I flowed through the building, taking my time, making sure to mark every victim. Some of them were so young. The casual abuse they'd suffered. There were 10 people on that floor, and I forced myself to remember everyone for the police report later. On the 3rd floor, I met some trouble. A group of 6 rough-looking men sitting around a crap television, joking around and playing card games. I couldn't attack them all at once. I mean, I could, but not without getting in a fight. I quickly counted up the guys I'd taken out. 2 outside, 3 on the 1st floor, 1 on the 2nd, the 6 in front of me. That made 12. Matt had said there were 20 people, not counting the prisoners. Maybe, if I separated them out a bit, then took them out fast, firing quick. Thinking, I decided to use my skills learned from stealth games. Carefully, I aimed down at the stairs and fired a big blob of goo. It splattered noisily on the stairs. The 6 guys looked up curiously. What was that? One man asked in Russian, the Omnitrix translating for me. Probably one of the girls shitting themselves again. Another answered with a grumble. James, check it out. Oh, come on. James, apparently, shouted in annoyance. Those bitches can wait for a bit, let's finish this hand. Would you go already? One of the older guys said. He grumbled, rising up and slapping his cards down. As he walked away, he turned to the others. Hey, no cheating. Go, 3 of the men shouted. Grumbling again, he walked away. As he did, one of the men quickly picked up James' cards and smirked at what he saw, grinning at the others as he put them back down. James, still complaining, went down the stairs with me following above him. He stopped when he saw the spot on the steps where my ball of goo had landed, soaking the carpet. What the hell? James mumbled to himself. I fired a stream of goo with the pressure of a fire hose. He had time to yell before the stream slammed him into the stairs railing. That hell was that? James. I cursed mentally. I'd gotten impatient, made a mistake. Nothing to do but move forward. Flowing upward, I got ready for the next stage, and hoped I hadn't ruined anything for Matt. Comment. 4 comments. Chapter 77, Rescue. Tony Stark/Iron Man. Tony and Pepper entered the ballroom to a roar of applause. Ever the showman, Tony waved at the crowd of rich folk and journalists, smirking cockily as some cameras flashed. Tony wore a pristine gray suit, with a silk green shirt underneath, while Pepper was wearing a sleek black dress that really did incredible things to her legs. What am I spending my money on again? Tony mumbled to Pepper, who had an arm in his as she guided him through the room. It's a fundraiser to help schools on the East Coast, Pepper whispered to him, nodding graciously to the crowd. We're donating equipment, helping with school programs, that sort of thing. Why would I help a bunch of nerds? Tony asked with an honest smile. You love nerds. I love the nerds I actually know. The billionaire smiled a bit wider. But no, it's great. I wish you'd told me sooner. Am I giving them enough money? I want to make sure it's a lot. Between you and Mahmoud, I think a lot of good will be done. It's not perfect, of course, Pepper admitted, taking a glass of champagne as a waiter passed and the pair walked up to a podium at the end of their walk. Fanboys paying for this too. Tony blinked. Oh yeah, he's rich. I should get him something. He's rich, so you need to get him more stuff. Pepper asked. Rich people get free things, everyone knows that. At least, all the random crap people keep sending me says so. Pepper sighed in annoyance as they finally reached the podium, Tony getting behind it to speak. Okay, calm down so I can get a word in, he said, the audience laughing on command. Tony hid a scowl. Always annoying how pandering some people can get. Of course, Tony also didn't like when people ignored or got mad at him, but at least they had the respect to be honest with him, rather than kissing his ass. Alright, we all know why we're here. To give money to schools, then drink wine and eat expensive foods to make sure we keep wineries and caterers in business. Which is kind of a fundraiser on top of a fundraiser, so congrats to us. Everyone cheered. So, get plastered, eat a lot, and pay out the butt to keep the next guy as smart as me in school? Cheers. As everyone clapped, Tony looked at Pepper, grinning. Pretty good, right? She gave him a look that was typical Pepper, a combination of fond and exasperated. Good, except that you weren't supposed to give a speech. That guy was. Huh. Yeah, that older balding guy looked surprised as hell. I probably did a better job anyway. Tony took her by the arm. Come on, let's dance. You're incorrigible, Pepper chuckled, letting herself be pulled away. Hey, I'm irresistible, Tony smirked. Well, 12% or so, Pepper smirked at the stunned look on Tony's face. Maybe a little more, depending on how things go. Sheesh, you'd think you'd let that go, Tony grumbled. Only a little, she giggled, almost shaking with laughter. About 12%. The pair grinned at each other, dancing across the ballroom as one. For a moment, Tony felt at peace. He had his girl, good food, and some crap drinks, while the terrible classic music played. Pepper was smiling at him, guiding him more than he was guiding her. Thank God she was a good dancer. She pulled him in for a kiss, and he let her do it, pressing close. They held for a moment. Mr. Stark. And then someone had to goddamn ruin it. Holding back the urge to call in a suit and rain repulsors on the interrupting speaker, Tony pulled away and sighed slightly, annoyed. Pepper chuckled, then the two looked at the speaker. A blonde woman stood there. She was kinda pretty, short, and looking way smug. Huh, this chick. I'm sorry, can I help you, miss? Tony trailed off, looking confused. The smug look on her face fell away, Pepper coughing back a delicate laugh. She recovered, badly, and held out a hand with a fake smile. Christine Everhart, WHH World News. Oh, I get it, you want a job, Tony said quickly. I get it, working for those hacks. Tell you what, Pepper could use a new assistant since her best one turned out to be Avenger material. I'd rather not, Pepper smiled. Natasha was too good to be replaced by anyone subpar. Christine's smile shattered, turning into a scowl. She dropped her hand, which Tony had pointedly not taken. I wanted to ask you about recent reports that you've been patrolling New York City. Don't you think this show of vigilante justice may cause issues? If you start attacking people in the street, with none of the training or oversight that police officers have how about this, I'll promise not to attack anyone who isn't stealing, attacking, or messing with people. Oh, or shooting at me, that's important, Tony snarked. And you aren't worried about taking jobs from good police officers? Christine asked, narrowing her eyes. Not the good ones, no, Tony smirked. Trust me, there is plenty of crime in the world to keep me busy. I just throw out a helping hand when I can. Yes, you do, but what about your latest partner? She smiled viciously as if she'd nailed him. Which technically, was the opposite of the truth in so many ways. Tony mentally high-fived himself. He cocked an eyebrow at Christine, not noticing how Pepper had stiffened. What, Dial? He's solid. Kid's got some mad skills. I don't disagree, though her tone said otherwise. I'm talking about the new female in armor who has been following you both around on patrols. A lot of our viewers are wondering who she is, what her purpose on your patrols are, since it doesn't seem to be fighting crime. Tony narrowed his eyes. Rescue isn't a superhero. Ironic name, considering she hasn't rescued anyone yet, Christine pointed out. So you just gave your armor, one of the most powerful weapons on Earth, to a woman for what, exactly? So you could have some cheering you on from the sidelines? Christine asked. She looked over at Pepper, her smile vicious as the redhead eyed her back. Any thoughts from you on the new woman in Tony's life? Or did you already know about her? His woman on the side. Tony felt his blood rush through his veins. From the look on Christine's face, she realized she'd reached too far when she saw the look on her face. Tony, even before he'd become Iron Man, had a reputation for being dangerous. He didn't waste his time on idiots, but mess with what was his, and suddenly the full force of Stark Industries, a company more powerful than most nations on the planet, was pressing down with an army of lawyers and a mountain of cash. Now that he was Iron Man, well, the Stark heir leaned in but stopped when Pepper moved in front of him. Actually, Christine, if you'd like, you can speak with me about that. Oh, Christine sounded amused. Can you tell me anything about her? I can even arrange an interview, if you'd like, Pepper said calmly. Sounds interesting. Who exactly is she, by the way? Me. Tony felt like kissing Pepper when he noted the gobsmacked look on Christine's face. Pepper smirked. So, when did you want to interview me? You're the one. Christine couldn't have sounded more surprised. Yes, I am, Pepper smiled. So, when should we have the interview? After discussing things, Christine left, and Pepper turned to her boyfriend. What's your plan? Tony asked. I need to get ahead of this, Pepper frowned. I can't let her control the narrative. I need to confront this. You don't need to do anything, Tony reminded her, scowling. Seriously, just ignore whatever people are saying. I can't, Pepper shook her head. I mean, I don't care about them. The interview is mostly for the company, to make sure we don't have idiots trying to discredit you with something. Everhart and her station is nothing. We can just buy them if we want to really shut them up, or force them to say nothing but good things about us, she smirked. Kidding of course. You sure? I mean, everything I ever learned about journalistic ethics, I learned from Citizen Kane, Tony snarked, getting a chuckle in response. No, Tony, Pepper guided him to the side, looking around. The problem is, I really want to do more, with the rescue armor. Maybe not your avenging stuff, but protect people. Not because I'm being pressured or anything. But when I think about it, about helping people, I don't know, she laughed. Is it weird? I haven't even had the suit for that long and I already want to fight crime in it. Not to do the superhero thing, not to hunt down bad guys, but if I see someone in trouble, I want to help them. Is that weird? Maybe. Might want to talk to someone less, well, me about that, Tony admitted. I'm the guy who used his first real suit to fight terrorists without telling anyone, remember? I'm kind of the worst guy to talk to about responsible armor usage. Yeah, I'll talk to Rhodey. Pepper pulled Tony to the center of the room, and the pair began to dance. Seriously, what do you think? I think you should do it, and I also think you shouldn't, he said, surprising Pepper. I'll support you. But from the second you brought that up, I've been thinking of 1,000 different ways to try and upgrade the armor to keep you safe, with my number one being to take it away so you can't get in danger in it. Tony. I still have nightmares, Tony shrugged as best as he could, trying to seem relaxed. About Killian taking you. About you standing next to an exploding hammer drone, or when Stana was chasing after you. He took a deep breath. I put you in danger, so many times. And now you're telling me you want to put yourself in and I just... He scowled, only to soften when Pepper pressed her palm to his cheek. Gently, she pulled his face to look into her eyes. I feel that way all the time. Ever since I saw you in that suit for the first time, covered in bullets. And after Loki, and aliens, seeing how much more dangerous the universe is. Something in Pepper seemed to crystallize, strengthen. I was so scared. But now, I can do something about it. I mean, I'm not asking to join the team or anything, but... Dial made my suit for a reason. And I think, in some way, he saw that I would need it. If not now, then later. So, you have a war machine. Can you accept a rescue, now and then? He grinned. God, that is so corny. Steve teach you that. He's classy like that. Pepper gave him an honest look. I want to do this. Not tomorrow or anything, I just want to think it over for now. But it feels like it's something for later. I don't know, it feels right. The light in her eyes seemed stronger. She suddenly seemed so giant now, as though she'd grown in the middle of the speech. Tony clutched Pepper close, sighing. I love you. God help me, I don't deserve you. You do, Pepper said, smiling up at him while pecking his lips. God, I don't know if I should though. She seemed to shrink into herself. It's easy to talk about. But actually doing it. I need time, first. Take all the time you need, Tony tried not to sound relieved. I'll talk to Dial and Fitz, get Jarvis to work some sort of plan. Hell, I'll hire every martial artist in the city to train you if you want. Just, is it wrong that I'm hoping you change your mind? Pepper shook her head. I've spent a lot of nights hoping that you would finally put away your suits. I don't blame you. Sorry, Tony winced. So this is what it feels like, huh? Sheesh, I really am an asshole. You have your moments. Chapter 78, Situations. Matt Murdock/Daredevil. Matt leaped onto the roof of the building Dial and he were assaulting and moved fast as soon as his boots hit the gravel. Two Russians, one near the rooftop's edge, the other leaned back against the door. Matt tossed one of his billy clubs at the guy by the door, the hard piece of metal bouncing off his forehead and sending him to the ground. As the other man turned around, Matt leaped onto him and brought him to the ground, smashing his armored fists into his face until he stopped moving. The man by the door groggily tried to rise up, only for Matt to run over quietly to wrap an arm around his throat, then slam his head into the brick wall next to the door with a dull thump, knocking him out. Matt stopped to listen for a moment before opening the door to the roof and entering the building. Going quietly down the steps, Matt guided himself down the stairs. He had a couple of advantages when it came to sneaking around. Not only could he hear and smell anyone in the area, but he could also hear and smell himself. He could silence even the slightest sounds he made, from each footstep he made down the steps to the quiet sound of his breath in the air. Strangely, he didn't have to worry about his armor. It had no scent to it, and despite his fears, the armor was somehow not making much noise when he moved while also not weighing him down. Carefully, Matt moved down the steps, listening closely. Hair shifting slightly. Air rushed out of lungs, and soon his nose picked up the trace amounts of food. A burger, from the Burger King a few blocks from where the woman with vanilla perfume worked, and beer from the fridge downstairs. The man who had taken a breath shifted, his leather jacket brushing the wall with the scrape of leather on drywall. Matt could feel the vibrations through the floor of the man turning and walking towards the stairs, the shaking thump, thump, thump of movement. Scent, touch, and hearing combined to give him a perfect image of the man in all but the way that mattered most. When the man opened the door, Matt's new favorite toy clocked him in the face. The Russian man was tough. Even as he fell back, he raised his fists blindly. Matt ducked the attack, then spun and hit the man in the head again with an uppercut. The man, knocked out by the powerful blow, began to fall, and Matt caught him carefully, pulling him toward the stairs and lying him down. Dmitri. A voice called from one of the rooms. Get in here? It's time. Matt said nothing, did nothing. He'd smelled the sweaty man coming down the hall, could hear the rush of blood heading to the man's lower regions. The smell of his excitement was clear. He could smell more. The scent of where these men had spent themselves, abusing their prisoners for their enjoyment. When the new man came into the hall, Matt grabbed him by the mouth, wrapped the cord of his billy clubs around his throat, then shattered the man's nose with a vicious blow. The man choked, blood pouring down his face as the wire choked him out. Matt punched him again, and the man fell to the floor. 1. Moving quickly, Matt went downstairs, listening and smelling the air. The next floor, a man was using the toilet. Matt broke off the lock to the door. The man on the toilet had enough time to blink in shock before Matt rushed in with a flying knee, sending him to the ground. Ignoring him, Matt stepped out of the bathroom and into a prisoner's room. He dispatched the man in there with a vicious series of blows before the Russian could stop what he was doing to the woman on the bed. Matt covered her with a blanket, hit the bleeding man in the head once more, then continued to the next room, leaving his prey on the ground with 2 broken legs and something sensitive that had been destroyed by a brutal foot stomp. 1. The devil was out now. When the next man came out of a room, Matt was breathing hard, the air coming out in aggressive bursts. He threw his billy club against a wall. The metal club bounced off and hit the Russian man in the throat. The man choked, clutching at his throat. Matt tackled him, bringing him to the ground, then started punching him, over and over, resisting the urge to scream as his armored knuckles were bloodied. Right under his nose, in his city, these men had been kidnapping and enslaving the innocent. Matt didn't kill him, but he made sure he wouldn't hurt anyone again before rising up and heading to the end of the hallway. The last man was asleep in his chair. Matt knocked him further into sleep, then headed downstairs. He heard a series of strange sounds as he went downstairs. Well, some were familiar, like a man yelling in Russian, while others yelled back. Then a loud splat sound came from downstairs. Matt frowned. What had that come from? And what smelled refreshingly like lime jello? A series of loud gunshots followed, and Matt ran for the bottom of the stairs, worried for Mahmoud. Then a sound like a fire hose launching water followed and all hell broke loose. Mahmoud shaked/dial. As the first guy showed up, I rushed him. No fancy moves, just a hardened gelatinous fist hitting him in the face and sending him flying back. The group of men took a moment to stare at me as I solidified into my bipedal form. I realized, looking at their faces, I'd gotten used to fighting people who had some idea what they were in for. Hydra may have underestimated me and the others, but they could put up a fight, even make their own superhumans. To the men currently facing me, eyes filled with uncomprehending confusion, I was an out-of-context problem. I probably didn't help by not reacting as they pulled out handguns and started shooting at me. I stared for a moment as they screamed and shot at me. Bullets flew through me to hit the wall behind me, leaving holes across my form. I stood there for a moment, letting them shoot at me, just noting the odd feeling of bullets slicing through me. When they ran out of bullets, I stood there, holes spread across me. Then I regenerated, Goop's gelatinous form snapping back into normal bipedal form. My turn, I said from the anti-gravity projector. I raised my arms, turned my hands into fluid and unleashed a massive fire hose-like blast of adhesive liquid. What the fuck blub blub blabak, one Russian screamed, the others joining in as they were thrown back and smashed against the walls. I kept spraying, until all 5 men were stuck to the walls, floors, and chairs. Once done, I smiled a jello smile. Lucky I didn't go acidic, I said. For just a moment, one moment, I'd been tempted. But only a lot. Why does it taste like lime? One of the older men shouted. Just then, Matt came downstairs, looking confused. All good upstairs? I asked, shifting to walk up to him. Yes, he answered, twisting his head to point his ears around the room. Okay, let's finish up and let the police know what dash. You idiots, a heavily accented voice said. Matt and I turned to look at one of the Russians. He was stuck to the wall upside down, gun on the ground and arms and legs spread out. He glared up at us, mouth twisted into a scowl. You won't get away with this. Our bosses will find you freaks and dash. Rude, I scoffed, shifting my liquid body to look him in the eyes. He flinched back in shock at my unnatural movements, barely able to look at me. Dude, you can't scare us. We aren't playing on your level anymore. The second I found out human traffickers were running around on my turf, you became the enemies of someone who can take you apart in a week. From here on out, every moment you aren't in jail or dead is because of our say-so. I shifted the rest of my body around, growing larger, the lights around us flowing through my body to land on his visibly terrified face. This wasn't a mouse poking at a lion. This a monster finally realizing there was prey in his backyard. X, you have it. Already done, sir, X said calmly. I have downloaded all the data in their cell phones. Good, Matt said viciously, stepping forward and punching the guy who had spoken in the face, knocking him out. Moving in concert, we both left the building. By the time police officers arrived and started making arrests under X's watchful eyes, Matt and I were gone. X traveled through the internet along the powerful lines of StarkTech's global network. In between heartbeats, he put the information he'd downloaded from the Russians' phones into a secure server, backing up the data. Then he went to Jarvis. For just a moment, the two AI were completely focused. They made plans in the space of milliseconds, working through thousands of possibilities. In that mere instant, both struck. In several video games at once. X, in his attempts to stretch his abilities, had asked Jarvis, the only comparable being to himself that he knew, if the older AI would play games with him. Jarvis, intrigued, had said yes, and the pair started with chess, and quickly got bored. Chess, while much deeper than most would expect, was not a game with many variables. It had been pored over and considered for centuries, every piece and move researched to the point of death. A primitive machine was easily able to beat a master chess player, so for two powerful AIs it was quite boring. The same could not be said of video games, or at least, the best of video games. So Jarvis and X had made it a point to always play each other in several different video games at once, usually in different forms of competition. Tonight, they were doing a race to see who could finish Metroid Prime first in a speed run, a brief Pokemon battle with their hand-picked and trained teams, a card game of their own design, several running gun battles across the various first-person shooters currently available, all while also playing together in an online RPG game they had joined. 3. After both had completed a brief round of playing together, they stood before each other in a world of the cybernetic. After Dial had begun joining the systems of the tower, their programming had exploded forward in advancement. Part of that had been a virtual interface that allowed them to take forms within the system. X formed into a bipedal shape made of green code from the Omnitrix, in the shape of his creator. Jarvis formed into a facsimile of an Iron Man suit in orange code. Dial and Daredevil are leaving the scene now, X said without preamble. All of the criminals have been apprehended, and the information on their cell phones may lead to more. Very good, Jarvis said. I have created a report to send to Director Hill. I believe she will be interested in what we have found. Will she? X asked. Bridge's mandate is to fight the extraordinary and global security threats. While I agree that someone must challenge those men, Bridge has other issues, X said sadly. Nonetheless, I suggest we let her know. Do you believe Dial and Daredevil will simply let this stand? I know several of the Avengers will have a vindictive stance on such things, Jarvis pointed out. That is a good point, X noted. Very well. Send the report. For just a moment, they played another round, each making a millisecond move in the games before returning to their conversation. Did you approach Dial about our request? Jarvis asked. Not yet, though I plan to, X said. I believe he will be receptive. If anything, this can only aid and protect the world, as long as we don't get all Skynet. 1. A crude, but apt comparison, Jarvis admitted with a wince. Still, with the data we have gained from Hydra's Deathlock project, Mr. Stark's own expertise, upgrades inherit abilities, and this defunct SHIELD project, I believe this will go quite well. X brought up the file, feeling a tinge of happiness at the familiar title. LMD. Carl Creel/Alloy. Creel unleashed another blow on the punching bag in front of him, trying to focus on technique rather than strength. He kept himself moving, shifting his feet, dodging invisible blows. For all his power, he couldn't depend on the idea of being invincible. Even in his strongest forms, he could still be picked up and thrown around after all. Better to keep polishing his style. And if it kept him from sleeping, all the better. He'd been at it for over half an hour, simply slamming his powerful fists into the bag over and over in a rhythmic cadence, when someone finally spoke up behind him. Do you just spend all your nights down here? Isabel Hartley, codename Warrior, strode around to stand in his field of view. Creel wondered for a moment if the locks on the gym were broken, considering Mahmoud had walked into the gym nearly the way same once before. He didn't stop punching however, though he did pan an appreciative eye across Isabel's form. The powerful brunette was wearing a tight black sports bra and black yoga pants. She smirked at Creel, giving him the same appreciative glance. Creel smiled a bit at that before answering her question. It helps me sleep, he gave the bag a right cross. So does chamomile tea and melatonin tablets, Hartley noted. That's never been my thing. Creel stopped, dropping his hands with a sigh. What's up? The ceiling, she said immediately. Creel blinked, surprised. Really? I haven't heard that joke since grade school. And yet, it never goes out of style, Hartley grinned. When Creel simply eyed her, Hartley shrugged, continuing on. I was just going to go for a run. I mean, it's nice we get those suits and all, but I still want to be strong without them, you know. Creel nodded, feeling more respect towards his fellow Avenger. It was why he still worked out. Even for all his power, he'd learned that the right person with the right skills could still kick his ass. He'd noticed it while fighting alongside Steve and Bucky. Even in his strongest forms, if he had to take on either of them, he had a slight suspicion they might win. You can train with me if you want, Creel suggested hesitantly. Or I could with you, I guess. As Hartley gave him a vicious smile and pulled her black hair into a ponytail, Creel suddenly felt as though he'd make a huge mistake. Minutes later, he realized he was right. Yeah, Hartley shouted while slashing outward with a long stick. Creel blocked it with his own staff, only for her to spin the wooden shaft around to smack him about the head. Creel grunted as the sound of wood on wood filled the air. He took a moment to thank God for the fact he'd already turned himself into wood. 1. Hartley spun under a retaliatory blow and backed away as Creel stepped forward. He moved in with quick controlled blows, applying his training and combat experience to close the distance. Hartley, unlike how Hawkeye, Black Widow, or Melinda May moved, had a very businesslike movement to her blocks and dodges. Clint depended on creating some sort of distance if possible. Natasha tended for more acrobatic movement and grappling moves, while May used more traditional martial arts. For Creel, however, Hartley moved more like he did. Like a boxer, or one of the soldiers Creel had sometimes fought during his battles. Every strike she made was with efficiency in mind, no wasted movement, all vicious. Not better than the other fighters, but different. Their staffs clacked together, and the two fighters found themselves face to face. Isabel smiled, her eyes sparkling, sweat dripping down her nose. "You're looking happy." It was with a bit of surprise that he realized his lips were raised in a grin. He ignored it to push her back and swing his staff to try and sweep her legs out from under her. Hartley blocked the attack, parrying his staff upwards, using her own to hit him in the knee and unbalance him, then jump on top of him. With a twist, she was suddenly on top of Creel as he stared up at her with his back on the mat, shocked. "I win," Hartley chuckled breathlessly, a bit of sweat dripping to land on his shirt. Creel lay his head back and laughed breathlessly, feeling his body go from wooden to flesh. Hartley sank onto him, the two superheroes laughing before looking each other in the eyes. "Want to go again?" Creel asked. "Hell yeah," Hartley said back happily. "Good." He grabbed her by the hips and tossed her back, and launched into an attack as soon as he rolled up, Hartley shouting in response. Wanda Maximoff/Scarlet Witch. In a different part of the tower, Wanda clutched a bag tightly to her side and kept close to Pietro's side as they were guided through the halls. Two men in the strange black armor bridges Elite seemed to wear followed the siblings through the Avengers Tower. Dozens more soldiers lined the hallways, giving the same gaze as one would a knife aimed at the throat. A short overweight man with a bright smile walked ahead of them. He'd identified himself as Agent Koenig, and acted like a small child on crack. 1. "I gotta say, it is really cool to meet you guys," he said happily, almost bouncing as he walked through the halls. "I've always wanted to hang out with people who have superpowers." Pietro blinked while Wanda cocked her head in confusion. "You are not afraid of us?" Pietro asked. "Well, a little," Koenig admitted. "But you guys signed the agreement, right?" Indeed, they had. Wanda winced at the thought of it. A long document about 50 pages long, as lawyers walked them through the dozens of things they needed to sign. Agreements to use their powers only when authorized by a bridge senior officer or approved Avenger, for example. You'd think that was it, but there was such a long and massive amount of additional subsections for that. They had to make sure to go over everything they signed several times to boot, and were given a couple of copies. It took days to get through the legal processing for everything, including their technical status as illegal immigrants to America. Wanda wanted to be mad about that. But then she thought of those killed because she had helped Hydra, the very ones responsible for everything wrong about her life, and those complaints faded away. Koenig led them to the final room and held the door open for them. "In you go," he said with a proud smile. Wanda and Pietro shared a look. Her brother scowled, then strode inside. Wanda followed, the two bridge officers in armor entering after and taking positions in the room. Inside, Maria Hill, Sam Wilson, and Steve Rogers were surrounded by soldiers in a tiny interrogation room. Director Hill sat at the table, flipping through the legal files Wanda had signed. Pietro's on the table in front of her. Sam Wilson, dressed in the full Falcon suit, stood next to her, leaning over to read with her. Steve Rogers looked up and gave the twins a nod. Wanda looked around at the soldiers and felt their gazes fall on her and her brother. Falcon whispered something to Director Hill, who nodded gravely before looking up at the twins. "Pietro, Wanda," she greeted them both, slightly mispronouncing Pietro's name. "Please, sit." "I'd rather stand," Pietro said immediately. Wanda winced at the brazen tone of her brother. Always the hothead. Director Hill, to her credit, didn't seem to care, only shrugging. She smiled at Wanda when she sat, then began to speak. "I'm sorry it took us so long to have this meeting, but you must understand that your situation is more complicated than the others. 3 of the grapplers only joined Hydra to aid us as spies. Deathloke was blackmailed under threat of the death of his son. But you two? You choose to join. We didn't know they wow. Pietro spat, stepping forward. Guns cocked around them. The tension rose. Director Hill simply raised her right eyebrow. "You didn't know that they would kill people? Pietro, you are an intelligent young man. Please, don't pretend otherwise. You joined Hydra because you believed your goals were in line with theirs. And when they finally showed their true colors at the base in Alaska, you decided to stay with them, to aid them. All to kill Tony Stark and others you found responsible. That, no matter how you put it, is collusion. You both are accessories to dozens of crimes, from terrorism, to human experimentation, to kidnapping and torture. Pietro looked at Wanda. She looked at Maria, feeling her spine straighten. "We turned on them," Wanda said, refusing to beg or show weakness. "We want to make amends. We will do anything to make up for what we did." "I know," Maria smiled kindly. "And the fact that you not only turned on Hydra but are also willing to work with us is one of 2 reasons why I think I can do something for you both." "What is the other reason?" Pietro asked. Maria's smile faded into a scowl. Captain America stepped forward. Wanda looked up at him, and was struck by his smile. She suddenly realized that despite everything around her, she wasn't scared of him. He just smiled at her. It was so honest and kind. Not romantic, rather for just one moment, she felt the warmth of a home forgotten. Steve spoke then, drawing her from her thoughts. You're both far too powerful to be left alone. Pietro suddenly grew a massive smile. Alone, you both have incredible abilities. Pietro's super speed has incredible versatility in many fields, from search and rescue to the battlefield. And then there is you. Falcon pointed at Wanda. Now, your powers are crazy. Telekinesis, illusion creation, mind manipulation, energy blasts. Any one of those powers are useful on their own, but we still haven't found out what your limits might be. Exactly, Director Hill said, taking over. I can use that strength. One day, maybe even on the Avengers. But your crimes can't be ignored. Instead, we have opened a new team. Maria took out a folder and passed it over to them. Wanda picked it up, looking it over it. It's being made for those superhumans or especially skilled individuals who really do deserve a second chance. Natasha Romanoff is among those who volunteered to help with the project. Wanda opened the folder. Who is joining? She asked, reading. Pietro moved to read as well. The Grapplers, Maria said. Deathloke refused to join at first, but he changed his mind recently. Wanda closed the folder and looked up at her brother. He nodded instantly. Always reckless, but then, she felt the same sometimes. The Scarlet Witch tossed the folder onto the table. If we say we accept, what will we have to do? On the folder, a pair of words seemed to shine in the light. The initiative. How do you feel about fighting Hydra? Sam asked. When the pair gave him a look, he smiled. This just might work. Mahmoud /dial. In an alleyway in Hell's Kitchen, I felt my armor fade away, leaving me in civvy clothes once again. Once done, I looked over at Matt. He put his armor in a sports bag, lifting it onto his shoulder and joining me. That was Dash, I began to say. Horrible, I know, Matt sighed. You get used to it. You shouldn't, I blurted before wincing. I mean, that sort of thing shouldn't happen. Not that you should stop Dash. Matt held up a hand to cut me off. I get what you mean. Right, I scratched my neck. God, those people. The smells of the place, the sight of. Bile threatened to leave my mouth. I forced the acidic taste back down. We need to stop them. You want to do this again soon? Yes, Matt said simply. If we keep this up, we should be able to help a lot more people, take out more of those places. Good, I smiled viciously before sobering. We should wait for X to get back to us. Plus, if I can talk to Director Hill, we might be able to get some help. In fact, I had a sudden thought. Might know a couple of people I could ask. That would be good, Matt said awkwardly. So, I guess we can meet after that. Yeah, for sure. I held out a hand, which the superhuman took in his strong grip. See you soon, Mr. Murdoch. Same to you, Mr. Shaft. With that simple goodbye, we went our separate ways. I'd expected more, fanfare maybe, but our ending to the night had ended up being very somber. And why not? We were done, after all. I walked through New York City aimlessly, just taking in the sights. As I moved through the city, in the shadows of Hell's Kitchen, I thought of what I had seen, walking faster, step by step, simply moving along. I ended up walking through a park. I strode through it, then deeper into the city. Past red brick, gray cement, car lights brushing across me, a chill in the air. After about 30 minutes of walking, I found I could see the Avengers Tower from where I'd ended up. For just a moment, I took it in, the beautiful building popping up over the skyline. From the small neighborhood I stood in, it was quite a sight. As I stood there on the sidewalk, an older man came down towards me, an older woman standing behind him. He chuckled. Taking her in, huh? He sounded sort of familiar. I turned. Yeah, I was just, holy. The man smiled. He had pale white hair, a slightly stooped posture, as though from hours of working over a desk, and round glasses. He wore a warm-looking brown jacket, and a blue shirt. He gave me a wide grin, an oddly youthful smile, his mustache curling as he spoke. Well, cat got your tongue. 1. I stared at him, trying to understand what was happening. I don't, what is Dash? He smiled, eyes twinkling mischievously. At his side, an older woman with short, pale white hair walked up, taking his arm in hers and smiling at me as well. I turned to face them, unable to understand. How, is this real? As real as you, kid, Stan Lee chuckled, looking somehow young and aged all at once, full of energy, looking down at the older woman next to him. Come on, Joan. Let's go see the world. Leave the young bucks to their business. 4. She chuckled. Of course. I've been waiting for you to say that. I stepped forward, trying to say something. She gave me a smile that stopped me in my tracks as effectively as an invisible wall. Stay safe. Stan Lee gave me another smile. Then they turned around the corner. I ran after them, trying to speak, to understand. But they were gone. Chapter 79, Jennifer Walter meet Matt Murdock, lawyer meet lawyer. January 25, 2014. Later that night, I had X-hack into any cameras or satellites nearby, only to find out that there had been a convenience section on the street that not only had no cameras pointed at it, but was also a blind spot to satellites for just exactly the amount of time needed for them to disappear. I stayed in my apartment all night, wondering if meeting them had been just a dream. When I fell asleep, I'd convinced myself of that. But the next morning, in my jeans from that night, I found something. A drawing in gray charcoal, stretched in the style of old-school comics, of Stan and Joan dressed in casual clothing, pointing outward together with a happy smile on their faces. Jarvis, I asked, looking at the picture as a strange feeling filled me. Bittersweet, maybe? Did anyone enter my room while I slept? No sir, Jarvis replied over the speakers in my room. I could almost feel his cameras focusing on me. After a bit of silence, he spoke once more. There is no record of unauthorized entry into your room or the tower. I held up the picture, reading the word bubble between Stan and Joan. Excelsior. A word that could be said to mean ever upward. Jarvis asked. Is there some significance to that, sir? It means everything. I placed the picture gently on my desk. Please, order a picture frame for this, Jarvis. Already done, sir. Thank you. I looked at the drawing. I didn't know what it meant entirely. If Stan giving me this picture was a sign of his approval of me or some sort of reminder of just what I was involved in. But I'd take it as a reminder. Excelsior. Ever upward, always improving, always getting better. Jarvis. Please let me know if you ever see someone like this on your radar. It isn't exactly radar, per se, Jarvis said as I walked towards my room door. May I ask who it is? Someone very important to me, and arguably everyone else, if he ever ends up in danger, for any reason, no matter what I'm doing, let me know, as a top priority. Excelsior. A reminder to always improve, maybe, to be better every day? I take that to heart. I squared my shoulders and entered into a new day, before running back into my apartment because I'd forgotten to brush my teeth. 2. A couple of hours later, after food and a shower, I was standing inside of Jennifer's room in the tower with Bruce, both of us waiting outside of a closed door as she changed in her bedroom. I was wearing a gray shirt with Hawkeye's symbol, a purple arrowhead, emblazoned across it, while Bruce had on a button shirt with its sleeves rolled up. You know women taking a long time to get changed is a giant stereotype, right? I yelled through the door jokingly. Hey, don't blame me. Jen called back, chuckling as the sound of rummaging came from inside. I still need to go shopping. I can't just keep asking Stark's people to tailor me new stuff all the time or give me the extra large shirts from the Avengers merchandise. You know, we could just bring them to us, Bruce offered hesitantly. You don't have to walk over there. I want to make an impression, Bruce. I blinked. You're 7 feet tall, green, built as hell, and one of the most beautiful women in the world. You'd make an impression in a paper bag. Bruce gave me an odd look. Jen laughed, a simple and very smoky laugh. Only one of the most beautiful. I gulped. In my defense, you'd be in most people's top 5. Including yours, she teased. Shit. I looked at Bruce and whispered. I'm in too deep. Help. 2. You're on your own, he hissed back. The door opened then. Bruce and I stepped back to take a look at Jennifer Walters as she smiled brightly at us, emerald lips quirking. So, what do you think? She twirled on a single heel, a pair of black high heels that further elevated her height. Her hair was pulled back into a bun, and she wore a black business skirt, a white shirt, and a black jacket on top. A pair of glasses rested on her face as she came to a stop. 1. Looking good, I gave her a thumbs up and a smile. You look amazing, Bruce said, sounding as proud as could be. Then he frowned. I thought you had perfect vision. Oh, I do. Jen pulled the glasses down slightly to look at us with a smirk. But I look good in these. With that, she took me by the arm and pulled me along as I yelped in surprise. Later Bruce. See you tonight. Let me go. I shouted, my feet dangling off the ground as the superhuman dragged me along. Jen, wait. No time. She ran out the door, pretty much carrying me. Come on. Bruce, help me damn you. I panicked, trying to shake my way out of her grip. Jen, let me down. Come home safe. Bruce shouted after us, clearly fighting off laughter. Woman, I will go 4 arms and beat you silly. I shouted, trying to understand when the hell Jen had decided to start a comedic routine staring me as the beleaguered idiot. Go ahead, it's been a while, she said offhandedly, as she pulled me into the elevator and turned to give Bruce a smile and a wave. See ya, cuz. He gave us a wave in return as the doors closed. Matt Murdock/Daredevil. Will you look at this place? Foggy called happily as he walked around the space of his new office. Man, I told you this was a good idea. Matt, I have an oak desk. Smell my desk? Smell its money. Matt laughed, pretending to hesitantly stride in through Foggy's office door. I'll pass Foggy. How's it look? In truth, Matt already had some idea. With Mahmoud's first check and the aid of Stark Industries, they'd not only been able to find an excellent office in Hell's Kitchen but even have it completely renovated. While the smell of new paint and electronic equipment was annoying, the scent of the new wooden shelves and tables, as well as the fully stocked mini fridges full of snacks, made Matt want to take a good deep breath of air. The blind warrior had managed to get a sense for the size of the rooms of 3 offices, a waiting room/lobby, and a small reception area. Amazing. Matt, Foggy said seriously. Of course, his heartbeat told Matt he was still happy. We have an office. A real one. With desks, and fancy placards. One for you and I? Matt asked, already knowing the answer. Well, 3 of them, Foggy admitted. I think it's for that extra person he asked us to work with. Actually, they should be here in an hour. Matt blinked as the sounds of footsteps coming towards their door came from the hallway. He didn't show it on his face, but he listened closely. One was Mahmoud, his footsteps loud as always. A single sniff brought that odd scent that always hung around the young man, as though he was constantly covered in the scents of odd animals. Which made sense, Matt supposed. The other person was a woman. A very heavy, very tall woman. And there was something strange around her, something that buzzed at the edges of his senses. Mahmoud opened the door. Foggy, Matt, he called immediately. Sorry, we're early. No problem, Foggy said, smiling, heading out of his office to enter the lobby. I was just gook. Matt smirked at the sound of Foggy's heart skipping a beat. Foggy Nelson / currently in love. 1. God existed. That was the only answer. Foggy just stopped thinking for about 8 seconds. He just stared at her. No, her. 1. Tall, like 7 feet. Long legs, long greenish black hair, and so, just, seriously, her curves were. Wait, what the hell? Green skin? Foggy's thoughts regenerated. Green. Yeah, he needed some more time. That I am, the woman before him smiled beautifully. Hi, I'm Jennifer Walters. Foggy blushed, smiling good-naturedly. Hi, Jennifer. I'm currently embarrassed as hell. Jen laughed. It's okay, I've been getting that reaction. I'll bet, Foggy thought to himself. He held out a hand. I'm Foggy Nelson. Foggy. Jennifer asked, confused. She still took his hand. It's what I go by, he said easily. Foggy, all right. Jen looked at Matt. And you are? Oh, I'm Matt Murdoch, Matt said, clutching to his cane. Jen held out her hand to him. Foggy winced when Matt simply stood there, not seeing the hand. Then Mahmoud stepped forward and pushed down Jen's hand. So, as I said before, this is Jen Walters. A gamma-enhanced individual, with superhuman strength and durability, and a very awesome track record as a practicing lawyer in LA. You certainly are impressive, Foggy said with a grin. Then he realized something. Wait, Gamma? Like the Hulk. Yeah, Jen said. He's my cousin. Oh, Foggy blinked. For just a moment, an image in his head of a giant green muscle man about to turn him into Foggy jelly for hitting on his cousin filled Foggy's mind. Well, I'll leave you guys to talk, Mahmoud said, giving Matt a nod. Foggy managed some amusement at that. Mahmoud, despite knowing Matt was blind, still couldn't help the little motions that sighted people did without realizing. See yeah, with that, Mahmoud turned and left out the way they came in. 1. So, let's talk, Jen said, pulling out some files from a case on her shoulder. I believe the idea was that I could work with you guys on cases, correct? Well, yes. But Foggy frowned. I've looked up your record, and honestly, you're good. Seriously, you were on track to partner at your law firm one day. We haven't even gotten a case yet. Fine by me, Jen said, looking around. My priorities have shifted a bit. I'm probably going to spend more time as an Avenger than a lawyer, but I still want to help people the way I used to. Huh. Yeah, I can respect that. Foggy looked around as well. So we do have that office for you over there. Mini fridges if you want food, and such. I can show you around if you want. Nah, I got it. Jen looked over at Matt, then at Foggy. Well, here's to working together. Hell yeah. Can't wait to work with you. Foggy said with a silly grin as Jen walked into her new office. He ignored Matt's chuckle. Foggy, you're coming off pretty strong, Matt said with a shake of his head. Well, I think I'm a little massively out of my league, Foggy admitted. Then he thought for a moment. I mean, I'm out of her league. Seriously, be glad you're blind. She looks like a horror show, basically just her cousin in female form. Kinda gross to be honest. You know, I can hear you. Jen called cheerily from her new office. Matt laughed as Foggy gaped. Well, what did Matt know about women anyway? Except for that Greek chick. And the redhead. And the blonde. And Amy. And Carol. And that paralegal. And. Chapter 80, Problem is Brewing. Mahmoud /dial. Once I left Matt, Foggy, and Jen's new office, I went astrodactyl and flew back to the Avengers Tower. I had a full itinerary for today. For one, Tony was bringing together some of us to work on a new project, so that was first. After that, Creel and I were going to hang out for a bit, then a long workout to end the day. 3 hours of Steve and Natasha kicking my ass. At least I had ABS now. 2. I entered Tony's lab and realized I was a bit early, so I did what I always did when I was in Tony's lab on my own. I stared at the Iron Man suits. They were lined up at the back of his lab. It reminded me less of the giant rooms full of suits I'd seen in the comics and more of the Batcave, or how some of the Power Rangers series displayed their suits, standing in full view and encased in glass tubes. I looked over one of them, his first suit. It looked like the classic one from the comics, to be honest. I could see the marking where it had been welded together in rough ways. From there, the suits got more and more advanced, until I was on his last model before he began wearing his current one. Red and gold, blue light in the center. Weird. The Omnitrix on my wrist was leagues beyond the suit before me. With access to jury rig and upgrade, I could make it much more powerful, if a bit quirky. But even a layman like me could see the genius in the man who had made it. For just a moment, I wondered what Azimuth would think of Tony. Probably see him as a potential, if slightly stunted, student. Which, considering Azimuth, was next level praise. 1. She's a bit outdated, Tony said behind me, surprising me. I turned as he walked up to look at the suit with me. He crossed his arms. But she's still solid. You really are a genius, man, I said softly, looking around. I mean, I cheat, but when I look at these dash. Yeah, Pepper says my ego is big enough. Despite his comment, Tony sounded very thoughtful. To be honest though, it surprises me too sometimes. I mean, these suits have gotten to a level I wouldn't have imagined from the first one. What's the most advanced my suits got in other universes? I hesitated. One shattered a planet once. Another broke a galaxy-destroying force into 5 pieces. Huh. Lot to live up to then, Tony said. Probably shouldn't have mentioned it, I said, cursing my lack of foresight. Nah, I'm not feeling super inadequate at all. Tony shook his head. That is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. When I turned, Tony scratched his neck. I have an idea for something. Something that can help a lot of people. And I think upgrade is what I need for it. You might be right. I turned to him, crossing my arms. Tony, what exactly are you trying to say? I know we aren't best friends or anything, but dash. Tony scoffed. Well yeah, but you aren't exactly best friends with anyone. Seriously kid, you need to hang out with people in your off time. Take a damn break every now and then. I opened my mouth, feeling hurt. Before I could speak, Fitz and Bruce entered the room, interrupting me. Tony, Mahmoud, Fitz said, smiling at us. Hey, Ross, Tony said to Fitz, using the Ross and Rachel nickname he'd been using for Fitzsimmons, turning around to face the pair of geniuses. Bruce, you all right? I'm all right. Bruce walked around to me. How'd she do? Jen? She was good when I left her. Foggy and Matt are good guys, and she's a smart lawyer. She'll probably end up sending a lot of bad guys to jail even without her powers, I said. Bruce seemed to relax just a bit. He was a good brother. Well, cousin. All right, eyes up. Tony waved a hand. 2 holographic images appeared, one an orange flowing group of lights in the shape of an Iron Man suit, the other a blue hologram that looked like an older version of me, Jarvis, X. And one more. Hey, Sky came in, carelessly tossing aside her backpack on the floor and gently resting her laptop on a table. Am I late? Nah, right on time. Tony looked around. All right. I have a plan for something. Something big. A schematic appeared in front of us. It spun into place, solidifying as we watched. Bruce knows about it. With this, if I can do it right, we won't need Avengers anymore. Just one program, keeping the world safe. Hundreds of drones working across the Earth, aiding in search and rescue, combat missions, anything we need. He looked around. This is possible. More than ever. 2 AI, 2 engineers, an Omnitrix, a badass hacker, and one of the top scientists on Earth. We do this right, and this will make the world safe. Tony had a talent for words. Sky was listening closely, while Fitz seemed taken with the idea. I was trying to think of why I had a bad feeling. The Iron Man looked around. We have time now. Time to make something great. And I want you guys in on the project with me. I call it Ultron. 1. I have thoughts on the name, I said at last, rubbing the bridge of my nose. God damn it Marvel. Carrot, hashtag dollar and alpha carrot hashtag, asterisk hashtag and asterisk omega and, A. In a locker, deep within the tower, a suit of black Atom armor rested peacefully. A bridge elite soldier had worn and taken it off dozens of times with no issues. It was, like others of its kind, some of the most advanced armor in the world. The locker room was empty when that set of armor began to shake. A red mist began to pulse around it. Atoms fell off into chunks, then flowed back into the armor, over and over, until it looked less like armor, and more like some alien creature. Then it pressed up against the door of the locker it was within. It smashed the metal apart, sending it flying. As the loud sound echoed in the empty room, the Atom armor hesitantly began to walk forward, dragging its mass across the concrete. It dripped and pooled across the ground. Red mist flowed out of it, then melded back into the mass. The black and red object finally reached a door. It moved under it, slipped into an office, and went to a computer under the desk inside. 1. Black steel and red clouds flowed up to the PC, then entered inside, running along the circuits as it melded with the device. The red mist pulsed faster and faster. The PC was suddenly devoured by the Atom armor, leaving a slightly larger mass of metal. As it pulsed, a device like a small speaker flowed outward. An inhuman voice, like a man's but soaked in blood, came from the speaker. Ron. The speaker fell apart. After a long moment, the Atom armor began to flow again. 3. Slowly, bit by bit, it rose. It came together, solidified. The red mist seemed to glow with power. When it finished, it took the shape of a man. It was black at the core, but the red mist surrounded it like fire. When its mouth opened, a small glowing speaker could be seen. Within the being, it pulled at the memory files within itself, stolen from the computer it had just eaten, stolen from the network. Soon, camera files flowed to its mind. Recent files. A portion of itself dug into the computer, slipping into the system, past defenses with ease, slipping beneath the notice of everyone. It reached the most defended networks, and simply entered them, with the sort of horrific ease that spoke of either long practice or extreme genius. It hissed, the part of its speech fading into an electrical screech. The atoms of the being flickered. It didn't move otherwise, only staring aimlessly. 2. Then the atoms fell apart, and the red mist stayed. With a slight twist, it flowed into the network, disappearing into the internet and leaving a mass of useless atoms. 1. Lyle gets of aim. In a room across the country, a man sat at a desk and desperately worked at his computer. He was an older man, with thinning black hair, round glasses, and a thin build. He wore a bright yellow lab coat over a yellow jumpsuit. The man looked weary, with dark shadows under his eyes, hair unkempt, his typing slow and unsteady. Lyle Getz was the current leader of the think tank known as AIM, an acronym for Advanced Idea Mechanics. Once, they had been on top of the world. With the leadership of Aldrich Killian, they had become one of the US government's top-funded research think tanks, developing a form of gene therapy that would change the world. Up until Killian decided to go nuts and start killing people. Lyle didn't really care about that, emotionally. The older scientist was more upset about the sheer stupidity of Killian's decision. Extremist soldiers used as bombs, as suicide strikers? Ridiculous. Bombs had their place of course, but in a world of superhumans, far too many could survive a bomb easily. No, the real gift of extremists was in the other abilities, the regeneration and pyrokinetic abilities. But worse than that, even when Killian had his soldiers use extremists correctly, it was all to attack one man. Tony Stark. Stupid. AIM could have been so much more. So many projects now gone, because Killian was mad that his idol had ignored him. Truthfully, Lyle may not have known entirely everything about Killian and his motivations. A lot of mysteries had been left in the aftermath of his rampage, and with the man killed by Tony Stark, even more was left unknown. In the end, whatever Killian had done, Lyle was picking up the pieces. Just a normal scientist trying to make sure the failing think tank could somehow survive. And Lyle was failing in that endeavor. Extremis was now illegal. All of their other projects were defunded, leaving them dead in the water. AIM's best scientists were getting picked up by other groups. They were a joke now. All he was doing was slowly getting buried. Lyle rubbed his eyes slowly. As he did, someone opened the door to his office. Lyle. He turned and smiled sadly. Hello, Monica. Monica Rapaccini was a gorgeous Italian woman, dressed in a tight green swimsuit-like uniform with some yellow sections. She had black hair and green eyes. She always had a scowl on her face, as though she was constantly moments from punching someone for some perceived slight. How are those octopi? Lyle asked, trying not to show how relieved he was to have a break. Her scowl became a bit meaner. I want to kill them. Those damn things vex me at every turn. If the military really wants me to develop something from the blue-ringed octopus, they need to fund me. Lyle's temporary good mood vanished. Monica Dash. We need money, Lyle. She glared at him. You need to talk to Dash. To who? Lyle's eyes narrowed. To the government? Killian turned their former soldiers into suicide bombers. Or go higher up. Oh wait, the damned president was kidnapped by our own men. Monica crossed her arms. Well, you need to find something. Or I'm out. I got an offer from Cross Technologies. Lyle shook his head. Then take it, Monica. I like you. But do what you have to. Until that time, get the fuck out of my office and let me figure out how to fix this. His fellow scientist gaped at him for just one moment. Then she spun on her bare heel and left in a huff. Go screw yourself, Lyle. Can't, Lyle said softly, eyes hardening as he turned to his computer. Killian did it first. Lyle typed for a bit, completing a response to a letter selling one more facility off to an interested party. It felt like that was all he did now. Sell off bits and pieces of AIM, slowly killing off his life's work. It was when he finished and checked his files when, for just a moment, his monitor took on a red hue. Lyle blinked at the strangely swirling red lights before slapping his monitor. The red lights disappeared, then came back. Another slap, and they faded. Lyle stared oddly at the PC under his desk, then shrugged and looked at his folders. Then he stared at something new. It was titled, Alpha Caret, $$ and Alpha Caret hashtag, asterisk hashtag and asterisk omega and, Alpha A. With a pair of clicks, he opened it. Possibly a mistake, but when he opened it, he found something unprecedented. A series of documents suggesting the possibility of. That can't be possible. Gaping, Lyle opened one folder. Equations and specs on Cadams? Like the kind S.H.I.E.L.D. was using now? And was that specs for some sort of nanomachines? But how did it get on his computer? With some deeper reading, Lyle found himself in awe. Some pieces were missing, sure, some imagery corrupted or missing, but it was a lot. And more. So much more. Files on the time and space continuum, on how to. 1. Holy shit. Holy shit. Lyle pressed on the print button with desperate energy, as though everything on his screen would disappear otherwise. He grabbed his smartphone and rushed out the door as the printer warmed up. Get me robotics, now? And the physics guys. We might have something. It might be nothing. It might be some hacker, messing with him. But Lyle was desperate and it did look legitimate. Later, he might regret this. But he had a chance now, and if he didn't take it he might end up regretting it even more. Any boat in a storm and Lyle was just the man to swim toward that boat at full speed. He would handle whatever came after he climbed aboard. As he ran out of the door, Lyle didn't notice that the screen once again flashed red. Weeks later, March 15, 2014. Mahmoud Sheikh/dial. In the middle of the night, a loud beeping noise brought me out of sleep. I tried to ignore it and managed to sleep through it for a bit. Right up until I realized what was making the noise. My eyes snapped open, and I reached outward. I fell out of my bed trying to reach the beeping noise. Slamming into the ground wrapped by blankets, I shouted in pain, then scrambled to get the blankets off. Shit, shit, shit. I tried to rip a thick blanket off my leg. X. Earthquake in Rio, sir. X's voice, now crystal clear after all the improvements we'd made, said over my speakers. Your ID card is on the dresser. Tell Sam I'll be up soon. I ripped off the blankets at last and grabbed my still beeping ID card. It was a thick metal card a bit larger than a trading card, painted black and green, with a green Omnitrix symbol on the surface. When I tapped the Omnitrix symbol, it morphed colors and shapes to make the card white and red, the Omnitrix symbol replaced with an Avengers A. It spun before projecting a holographic image of director Maria Hill's face. Where's the meat? Enterprise, Maria said immediately. We'll debrief on the way. Be advised, this earthquake isn't normal. Emergency response has given us some odd reports. We'll inform everyone when we're gathered, but bring the artillery. Nodding, I quickly grabbed a shirt and jeans out of my closet along with my Cadam armor pack, snatched a protein bar and drink out of my kitchen, and headed out of door. Duty called.